Hey, what's up, buddy?
Guy,
Hey.
how you been?
Yeah, I'm still wrestling with this kind of like persistent cough. Doesn't manifest unless I talk at length, but unfortunately, I do that professionally. So,
I'm sorry to hear that. Is it affecting like your recording and stuff?
yeah. So, like, if you watch some of my recordings, like at various points, I'm trying. My voice jumps up like 3 octaves as I'm trying to avoid hacking up a lung. But yeah, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Pretty busy over the weekend with some work stuff, but also excited to. I think that there's a lot of conversations happening right now about the next steps, and I'm encouraged by that. I like that those are happening,
We'll talk
and I
about
hope
that.
that you're gonna be a part of that.
I hope so too.
You know,
I hope so too. We'll
because you're an
see.
invaluable voice, I have to say.
Well, I mean, stop it. Stop it. I
Yours
mean,
is an
you
invaluable
you
voice.
say that, and yet when I say, "Hey, let's you and Joe
Well,
pick a
I
Hornets,"
sent you a text.
you lying sack of shit. You did not.
I did. Wait, I'll correct the record afterwards. It might not have sent, but I thought I sent. Give me the dates. If I didn't, then
No, no, no,
that's
no.
my
You're
bad.
supposed. No, listen. No, no, baby. No, listen. You're supposed to tell me based on their schedule what games work best for you between now
Oh,
until she
okay.
leaves, and
Yeah, I'll
then
do
we'll
that.
figure something out. That'd
Okay,
be
I'll do
fun.
that.
You'd get to meet my girlfriend. We could hang out. You'd meet some of the friends here. Yeah, it'd be a
I'll
good time.
I'll I'll be on sort of
I mean, it's cool. It's cool if you
on
don't want to be
watch.
friends or whatever. That's fine.
No,
No, it's
listen, I
cool. It's
already
fine.
consider you guys are my boys, and I
Yeah.
hope there's no hard feelings about the little post I made that started
I was
Oh,
gonna recommend
the
people follow us.
the post. Did you see that, Boy? The post where Peace goes like, "Listen, here's a comprehensive list of
Yeah,
the people who matter in liberal and progressive political commentary. The people who I'm really looking for." Basically, and I think he even said,
No.
if you're not on this list, you should truly go fuck yourselves.
yeah,
And he was like,
he said that.
Destiny, Brian Tyler Cohen, and I think that was it. I think that was it. No
That's not true. So
Beasley,
no, no.
no Pac-Man, no Adam Mockler, no me, no Hutch, no you.
So first
Yeah,
of all, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 names, so it's not just two. And I knew there was going to be a little bit of a stir over like omitted names or whatever, but I thought it was obvious, and sorry it wasn't clear,
No,
that
it's
present
cool.
company excluded. You guys are my boys, you're my dogs. Of course you guys should be followed.
he
And of
still
course
thought
you're
it was
making sense.
obvious. He thought it was obvious that
Didn't need to be
on a
said.
list of people he recommends to follow, it wouldn't include his podcast host.
That's right.
Okay, I'll make an amended
That's
list next
obvious.
week.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
it'll be
Thank
my
you. Your
definitive
your
list.
fucking consolation prize participation trophy
Well,
list.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
Too late,
make a
Pisco.
ranking, a tier ranking, and so you guys are gonna be all in the upper echelon for
I
sure.
want. We need S plus tier.
S plus? You
Yeah.
think you deserve S plus?
Fuck yeah, I do. As recompense for your betrayal. You. By the way, people, how does the Boy sound lower, like quieter than Pisco?
Yeah, I noticed that. I guess I can turn mine. I haven't changed my volume setting.
Here, let me. No, don't fuck with it. You've got a good setting. I'm turning you up to 113.
All right.
13
Well,
points higher
there we
than,
go.
yeah, and 13, which is only 4 points away from the age that our future attorney general likes in terms of women, allegedly.
Oh my god.
Our future attorney general. Tell me more about the prestige of the Justice Department, Pisco.
Yeah, you guys are like taking everything out on Garland, and I understand because you need someone to. And I don't want to have this conversation again. We can at some point if you'd like to have a longer form conversation, we can.
Yeah.
Um, I honestly think that Garland is an honorable guy, and I think he did a good job. And I think the contrast between him and Gates is shocking.
Oh, there's no question that Gates is a piece of shit and Merrick Garland is not. There's no question about that.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
there seems to be a
Merrick
question
Garland be
about
the
where
better
the
attorney
Garland is.
general? Yeah, probably. No,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no
He
doubt.
just slow rolled a bunch of stuff. He was
That's
just
right.
super fucking slow.
I don't really see the evidence of slow roll. I have to say.
Yeah, I swear to God, I tell you what, the next live and learn is just going to be me reading this goddamn
The
article to you.
quotes.
When
Yeah.
when you fly down here and we go to the Hornets game, Joe and Paulo are going to have a great time because I'm going to print this Washington Post article out and I'm just going to read it to foam finger and everything. I'm going to be reading this fucking article to you. Yeah.
I mean, it took him like until late 22 to even appoint a special counsel.
Yeah, but the
which
appointment of the
is
special counsel doesn't mean that that's when
wild.
the investigation started. The appointment of special counsel coincided with Trump announcing his run for president. Not
I'm sorry,
necessarily.
Hutch is just joining us, and Hutch,
hi,
this is
Hutch.
what you get for being late.
Sorry, guys.
We are, of course, complaining about Merrick Garland because what else are we going to do while we wait for you, Hutch? You're lucky it's not a Supreme Court rant, man. What's up, baby? What's up? What's going on?
What's up, boys?
Man,
Mr. Hutch.
Before we get, because there's obviously a lot to talk about in terms of particulars, but I do want to do a vibe check, a pulse check with how people are. We're little more than 2 weeks out from Donald Trump's victory, the Republican victory. In general, how are you all feeling? I talked about it a bit with Steven earlier today when I popped onto his stream, but I want to hear how you're feeling. I want to start with Pisco. Pisco, how are you feeling, buddy?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty dedicated towards doing something to fight back against Trump. I've found in myself a wellspring of energy and dedication towards the task ahead. It means I'm also angry and upset about what's going to happen. I'm reading everything that is happening in the news with respect to his appointees or nominees or whatever he's going to do. And that's making me very upset for the near term about the consequences for the American people. But I found that putting my head towards plans for what's going to come has been a really great way for me to stay on task and stay focused. It's almost like when you quote unquote hit rock bottom. I don't know some of you who have ever had like situations where you've let yourself go, or situations where you have to start a new industry or you have to do something like that. There's no time like the present to just get off the ground running and start making plans, start making sort of processes for how you're going to fight for whatever goal that might be. And for me, that goal is getting the right message across, being somewhat of a prick to Trump or the lies he's intending to spread. And that's something that motivates me, and it's bringing me a lot of energy. It's scary because I think it's a kind of a new world for me, and that's bringing a lot of uncertainty as well. But the underlying thought process that this is the right thing to do, it's the right thing to be fighting against Trump, and to be dedicating myself to that to me is it's helping me deal and cope with his victory.
Before we go on, what's funny? I don't understand why this is, but Hutch did include his people or his links, and it's not showing up again. It worked last time, but not this time.
No. It's when I'm already live.
But you were already live the last time we did this.
No. The last time I wasn't. Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know. I really don't know why it does that. So like,
I don't know.
The only option would be for me to take my stream offline and then
but like that's gonna be a pain in the dick, and people are gonna have to come back to you. And that's all right as long as you're live. Listen, if you see anything from your chat that you really want us to respond to, you're just gonna have to point it out, and we'll
all right. I'll let you know.
So that was Pisco. I do have a follow-up question for Pisco, but we'll wait until we're done here because you did say something interesting. Hutch, what about you, man? 2 weeks out, how are you feeling?
Not great, Bob. Yeah, not great. It's like in my personal life, what I did to cope with the election was I started to get more active. And so I started to slowly go back to the gym, and I'm doing 10K steps a day. I'm getting ready for the leftist revolution that I was promised was going to happen if Trump won. And I don't want to be caught off guard if that revolution comes.
He's prepping to do a lot of running when Attorney General Matt Gaetz's jackboots come chasing down prominent liberal streamers, and Hutch is top of the shit list. Go ahead.
It's so like I've taken like a few days off this month. I don't know. Like I feel like at this point we're in a point in time where we just have to eat shit for a little bit, and there's nothing we can do. Typically, presidents get a honeymoon period when they're first elected, and so there's just really not going to be a lot of pushback against these cabinet picks right away. If there's going to be any kind of serious resistance to these cabinet picks, it's going to have to springboard off of the actual hearings themselves, because then political clips go viral on Twitter and this kind of thing. And so there's really just not much to do right now besides just sit back and wait for the inevitable to happen, which is Donald Trump's going to be inaugurated. He's probably going to get most of his cabinet, and he is going to pursue. I really fully believe he's going to pursue like a mass deportation program. Stephen Miller was just on the news this week again, talking about how day one they're going to do it. I believe him. And so,
I hope we get
so
to
I'm
talk
just
about
doing
that
what
at
I
some point
can.
today.
What's that?
I hope we get to talk about that at some point today. I think. It's
Yeah,
really
we will.
interesting.
That's
Yeah.
on the list of things to dive deeper on.
No, I'm just making sure that I'm eating right. I'm getting active and doing 10K steps, and I'm getting enough sleep. So it's just like basic stuff for me right now. Yeah, I feel like pretty demoralized, I would say. You know, I don't think it's gonna last forever, but it's still fresh. So
Fair.
yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
What about you, Econo Boy?
Yeah, I wouldn't really say that I'm demoralized or anything like that. The feeling that I have mostly is almost one of wonder of like, man, like this is going to be crazy what Trump does when he's in office. Like, I think I was actually talking to my mom about this. I think that Trump's second term will be the biggest challenge for American institutions probably since the Civil War. Like, I think it's going to be really, 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 really challenging. It's not going to be worse than the Civil War, obviously, because I don't think there will be a Civil War. But
That's exactly what people thought before the Civil War. So
yeah,
wouldn't rule it
yes,
out. And obviously, none of us are particularly skilled with predictions at this point. So I would just say leave nothing off the table.
everyone.
People
Yeah, I mean,
did predict the Civil War, to be clear.
that's fair,
As it got closer. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
I don't predict a civil war. I think that the biggest question for me is, look, the signaling that I'm getting from the cabinet is that Trump is going to do what he says he's going to do. Okay, which is to say, normally we deport. I looked at the numbers on this. Like, how many people do we normally deport? The answer is like maybe 300,000 people a year, which is more than I thought it was, to be fair. But obviously a lot of people like flow in as well. So what's the net rate? I'm not sure. But like the idea of that going up tenfold, I wouldn't be surprised. And other things like the Republicans might pass like big sort of bullshitty cuts to things, which are bad. Obviously the civil service is going to be just in a terrible state. I think basically every moment that Trump is president. I think that the FBI, the CIA, these kind of organizations, you probably will see stories of, 300 FBI agents just resigned. Like that's going to be a story that we see probably at some point. I don't know about the universal tariffs thing. He's been kind of icy on that, but the mass deportations is going to be so bad for the economy in and of itself. I mean, like, and obviously the human rights violations associated with it. It's just going to be really bad, and I think it'll be bad in a way that I think a lot of Trump supporters and a lot of like independently minded people, quotation marks, will have to like really take stock of basically the entirety of their time defending Trump and supporting Trump. I think that we'll see if he does universal tariffs and 10 million deportations, we will see a recession pretty much just as bad as the Great Recession. And we will see a cope from people like Rob Noor, the likes of which we have just never seen before. Like we will see people somehow defend this. We will see people say somehow it just makes sense for the military to round up tens of millions of people and deport them, even though the economy is crashing, even though we're having shortages of shit. And we'll see people defend the same thing about the universal tariffs. We'll see civil services get eroded and people defending that. But hopefully we will see a large portion of people, like maybe 10% of people say, you know what, guys, like, this is pretty fucked up. Like, I think we need to not support this guy or this party anymore. And so I'm hopeful for the 26 midterms, but I'm hopeful because I think Trump's going to do a lot of damage. I think that's why.
So again, a lot of things I want to follow up on, but I'm going to go back to Pisco for a second because Pisco, you said you feel energized, and I'm curious. There's this idea that people on the left or people who are left adjacent are more comfortable as the resistance rather than the status quo. I actually don't feel that way at all. I am one of those people that I want the left to have power. And I mean, in a perfect world, we just win every goddamn election in perpetuity. I don't like being the resistance. I understand that there is an energizing, exciting feeling to it, but it's also like incredibly anxious and full of misgivings. So I'm curious for you, do you feel better being the underdog against a second Trump administration or no?
Not at all. No, for all the reasons Econoboy just stated and that Hutch alluded to as well. there are a lot of real costs that are going to be imposed on a lot of really vulnerable people, but also people like the everyday American who is having to consider their costs and also the imposition of a lot of things that Trump is going to impose on them vis-a-vis surveillance and other kinds of what I would consider to be more authoritarian measures. So that to me doesn't feel good. It felt good. Like to have those first 2 years of Biden where a lot was getting done and you could see real progress. That to me felt good. I almost feel the other way, where I understand there are certain members of the media class who feel better as an underdog, feel better as a resistor. But Republican, in terms of governance, they are no good at governance. And if you recall, the 4 years of the Trump administration, they did not do well at governing. When they took control of the House of Representatives in 2010, it was a fucking shit show. And so in terms of like, do I feel better or worse being out of power? I feel much worse being out of power. But that gives me las ganas. Ganas means like the drive, the want, the desire to change the situation and to find some path to having a sensible discourse and to promoting good killers in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean,
metaphorically speaking.
Metaphoric killers.
I mean, I'm just saying we don't want to coarsen the discourse with violent rhetoric. Go ahead, Econoboy, and then I've got a question for you.
No, I was just going to say, like, yeah, I'm not particularly politically discouraged, just to be clear. Like, I'm going to be doing all the same stuff that I have been doing. I'll try to volunteer as much as I can. Of course, I'll, make content and try to just generally advocate and multiply my voice as much as possible. And of course, I'll still have conversations with family members and stuff to try to maybe ease them into a reasonable political persuasion. But it's, I just think that it's unfortunate because I do think 2026 will be an incredibly good year for Democrats. And I do think 2028 will be an incredibly good year for Democrats. That is if Trump does what he says he's going to do. But again, that's at the reason that that's the case is like, because I think Trump is going to do such crazy things in office. And also one of the issues is it's kind of a black box. Like, it's like, I know some of the crazy things he's going to do, which are crazy, the things that he's going to do, but I don't know everything. Like, it's hard to actually predict like all the crazy things Trump is going to do in office. There's probably a lot of things that people haven't really thought about, or like things that he's going to do that maybe even he hasn't spoken about. And that's like a total wild card. Like, I have no idea. I think about, like, I guess my biggest systemic worry is you think about his plot, like some of the stuff that he was asking after he lost the 2020 election. Like, I could see like maybe Don Jr. runs for president and wins the primary, but then loses the general election to like whoever the Democratic nominee is. And I could see like some of those requests getting a lot further along in the process, like the idea of the military or the FBI like seizing voting machines or stuff like that happening. Like,
if Matt Gaetz is attorney general, I mean, you got to consider that he was a big lie loyalist. He was a big lie super spreader. He himself was. So he's not going to take the principled stance that Bill Barr took. So that's a fair point. And we're definitely going to discuss like all of the implications, because we now have new cabinet selections and we're deeper in the process from the cabinet selections we knew about when we last met. I do want to ask Hutch a question, though, just to see where everybody is on this. Hutch, do you share Econoboy's position that based on things that Trump has said thus far in the 2 weeks that he has been president-elect and the cabinet nominees, do you think it's also going to be worst case scenario that he is actually going to pursue at least some of the unhinged things that he proposed during the campaign?
I don't think there's any good reason to doubt that he's going to pursue a lot of these policies. I think the courts will check him. I think the Congress will check him. And so he does have to operate within the American framework, the way that our government is structured, which does place limitations on him that people like Xi and Putin don't need to worry about. But as far as banking on 2026, and maybe Econoboy didn't necessarily say this, but expecting that in 2026 that we're just going to have like blowout midterms, expecting that we're going to have a blowout election in 2028. I'm currently reading a book right now about all these strongmen throughout history, from Gaddafi to Berlusconi in Italy to Putin to Mussolini to Hitler and Trump. And it's
Is it Ruth Ben Ghiat's book?
It's called Strongman. I think, yeah.
It is
I think,
Ruth Ben Ghiat. Damn.
Right, yeah.
All right. Yeah. It's a really good book. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading, and I'm also reading Rage or War by Woodward. I'm reading
Yeah.
a couple books right now. I'm going to read a book on Franco after this. I've just, for some reason, I've decided, like, you know what, let's learn a little bit more about fascism, like immediately after
I
this
mean,
election.
pure coincidence, right? That you would select that particular topic to really
Right.
dive into.
So there are, I mean, there just are historical examples of strongmen coming in and doing really terrible things, and then the people love them for it. So I'm internally preparing for that as well. I'm preparing for, he does mass deportations and he gets an approval rating bump. Like I'm not saying that's impossible.
So again, I know we're going to be talking about the worst case scenario. And again, you said something interesting there, which I definitely want a Conaboy to push back on if he has something to push back on, and Pisco definitely, because he's a legal expert here, about to the extent to which that the courts could check Trump if they wanted to. But the reason I wanted to get your pulse on this, because this is something that's not talked about a lot, but I talked about it a bit with Steven earlier today, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I am also dreading the worst case or near worst case scenario, but I'll tell you something I'm also preoccupied with, is that doesn't happen. And so let me lay out to you an alternative that seemingly is really, really good, but I would argue down the road is just as destructive as anything we're talking about here. That Trump really wants to do is just kill the investigations into him, install loyalists who make sure that the institutions can't be weaponized against him, and then otherwise fucks off for 4 years. And things are relatively normal. Now, 10 out of the last 11 recessions began under Republican presidents. So if you're a gambling person, it would seem very likely that a recession would be on the way, especially if Trump passes or imposes these tariffs. But what if he doesn't? What if he actually does inherit the Biden economy and doesn't fuck it up, and things go for the most part the way they did for his first 3 years? Now, the caveat here is, he did start a trade war with China, which did not do particularly well, but it didn't kill the U.S. economy prior to COVID. What if he just coasts on Biden's coattails? What if the sentiment, not just from the right, but the left and independents, are like, oh, goddamn, Donald Trump really is. He just has that Midas touch. He's in office.
We're already seeing that. We're already seeing perceptions of the economy right down partisan lines. It's
right. No, 100%. But what if it goes further and it's not just partisan lines, but he wins over moderates and independents as well? And this idea that he's single-handedly responsible for the economy, and then there is no global pandemic to fuck it up, and he doesn't pursue the tariffs. And what if every time a bridge is built and a road is built and broadband connections are established because of President Biden's legislation, Trump is there to take the credit? The mainstream media doesn't push back on it. What if he replaces Alito and Thomas on the Supreme Court? Basically, what if it is the best case scenario for bad faith Republicans, and J.D. Vance or Don Jr. or whoever are teed up as the continuation of a new Trump dynasty? And then just to really set this tone, we already know that California and New York are slated to lose congressional seats as a consequence of the census. And what if Republicans, let's say we add a little cherry on top of this Sunday, what if they pass voter registration law or voter laws with their majority to, let's say, mandate voter ID, just to make it just a little bit harder for people to vote, a little bit more inconvenient? So what if all of that happens and there is no catastrophe and there is no crisis, there are no mass deportations? It's just a well-oiled machine that Trump inherits. I'm actually really concerned about that too. Not because I want people to suffer, but because my fear is that it will send the wrong message to Republican voters and Republican politicians, that not only are you incentivized to do the unhinged things that Trump tried to do, because you won't be punished for it, but this could be a spread or a spree of Republican victories in 2028 and 2032. What about that? Have you guys considered that at all? Because I think that's also on the table.
Yes.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. Yeah, I think that there's a chance that he does do that. I just don't. Again, we can only go off of the information that we have, right? And we can never get into Trump's head. It's not a place I'd want to be anyway. But the point is that we see who he's appointing to these positions, and like if he were to take some like moderate, like tilt establishment turn like he wouldn't be making Tulsi Gabbard the head of the DNI, right? He wouldn't be appointing Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz as AG took every Republican off guard. Nobody even thought he would be so bold as to do that. Like RFK as director of health, this is something people memed about. Like, LOL, if Trump wins, he'll make RFK the head. Like, nobody thought this was actually a thing that he was going to do, which to me just signals
I just want to say for RFK HHS, I shared a clip in which both me and Steven said, of course he would do that and nominate RFK for HHS. I think that was foreseeable.
I guess, yeah. I don't know the nature of that clip. It's not that some people maybe wouldn't have predicted it, but I think there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who, like Richard Hania, who you had a sparring match with on Twitter, who said to themselves, "Oh no, Trump isn't that crazy. He's not going to do this." Now the signals that we have is no, he will do this. He's planning on doing all the things he said he was going to do, and so I think that the probability of what you're describing, Josiah, is very low. But I will say that Trump winning a second term almost certainly cements, I should say, MAGAism and Trumpism for at least a decade, like another decade. Like I think that we're going to be dealing with the Trump family, and I think that I think I said something similar before the election happened. It's like if Trump wins, the Trump family will be as influential 40 years from now as the Kennedy family is today. Like this is a political dynasty. Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Barron Trump, these people will be relevant political figures their entire lives. They are part of that class now of American royalty who will forever and always be invited into, at the very least, Republican spaces, whether they're in power actively or just close to power themselves. And that's a very bad thing for this country. But I don't think he'll go down as a legendary figure like you're describing, Josiah, because I think the probability of what you're describing is ultimately very low. I'd be
Well, to be
surprised
clear,
if-
I just want to say before I toss the mic to Hutch and Peace go to weigh in on this, before again we go into the parade of horribles. I'm not saying that I know I expect let's say that happens. Let's say what I talk about happens, that somehow he avoids the way I described it to Steven when I was on Destiny stream earlier is like imagine, because Trump is incredibly lucky. I think like we can all agree that if luck is an observable phenomenon, Trump is the embodiment of it. He really is Teflon Don. And I could see a scenario where he is blindfolded and walks, like he navigates this minefield perfectly somehow and emerges unscathed on the other side. I think historians, in history will not be kind to Trump because of all the shit that he did in his first term. But I'm just saying I think that if it does happen, it could easily impress upon the American people, fuck yeah, what we need are these uncouth authoritarians, and the trains run on time and everything works because they won't do the analysis thinking, oh my God, he actually inherited a pretty good situation. That's my concern. Not that he's going to go down as a legendary figure in history, but that it will incentivize Republicans to continue to do the shit that they've done.
That's kind of what I mean by going down as like how many decades did Republicans try to emulate Reagan, right? And like be like him. And he was like the penultimate example of a Republican president,
the
Republican
archetype
leader.
Yeah.
And I think that if Trump were to do something like you're describing, he would essentially that mold would not just that the Trump family would be influential, that's already locked in, but that the mold of Trump and Trumpism would be like a necessary thing in the future. Now, I don't think that a person like Nikki Haley is winning a Republican primary for a long time, but I don't like as an electorally advantageous strategy, it's not clear to me that Trumpism would be optimal. But if Trump is able to like reclaim so much of his reputation, like, some huge, like 5-10% of Americans flip over from thinking Trump is crazy to Trump isn't so bad, and Trump isn't so bad to Trump's actually all right and he's pretty good, that would be disastrous. That would be exactly what you're describing.
Yeah.
Fortunately, though, I think the probability of that, like I said, is quite low.
What about
I don't
you,
think,
Hutch?
I don't think any of us are saying that we're resigned to this fate. So if anybody's watching this and feeling like we're telling you that this is going to happen, I don't think that's what we're saying. I just want to clarify that I think we need to be vigilant and not just expect that there's going to be these typical pendulum swings, because there's all these examples throughout history where strong men come in and are mightily rewarded by the people that they preside over. And it's silly to think that in America, we're just immune to that. Like there's nothing really fundamentally different from us than, Germans in the 1930s and Italians in the 1920s or whatever.
So Hutch, like to clarify that. So then you're, I'm not saying that you necessarily think this is the most probabilistic outcome, but you think it is not, you're not as not worried about it as Econoboy is. It sounds like, based on your
No, I
reading.
mean, like conventional wisdom would tell us that the pendulum will swing to the left. Trump provoked a lot of outrage right away in his first presidency. He did a Muslim ban in his first week, and that led to widespread protests at airports all over the country. I went to the one in San Francisco. There were 3,000 of us there. And so there's no reason to think that we can't have that again. I guess I'm a little concerned because it felt like in 2016, there was a lot of shock, a lot of anger about the election. And I feel like this time the risk is that people are going to become apathetic and exhausted, and they're just not going to have the energy to act as a foil to this incoming administration. So to the extent that like we can push back against that we can, I feel like that's part of our role as like covering this stuff and being like public about this stuff is like, we need to be very intentional. I think we need to be very careful about how we strategize and how we get people more engaged and energized. That's what's going to be on my mind for the next couple months for sure, is like, how can we, because I don't want to repeat the mistakes of this election. I want to learn from the mistakes of like how I covered this last election. So
Yeah, Pisco, I'm going to give you.
I don't know about you guys, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking about right now. Is like, how do we get people involved? How do we make it so that people don't feel so defeated that they just want to tune out?
Right, like that they're so exhausted by it. Pisco, I want to give you the last word on this particular tangent that I started about. Sure. Again, the low key sinister outcome that Trump just walks through this, and that there are no catastrophes that he triggers, which really reminds the American people about who he is.
Yeah, what you're talking about and what you're describing is kind of an entrenchment of power through good luck and good fortune, and not these wild movements, which I think for reasons that Econoboy and Hutch have competently outlined, I don't expect that to be the case. But if it were the case, I think the die is almost already cast. The Republican Party as an institution is entrenched in the United States, and Trump is entrenched as the Republican Party. That's not going away. It almost reminds me of the conversation about, what about pre-COVID? Why don't we go to a time like before the pandemic? Like when is it going to get back to normal? I'm sorry to say, is something happening? Okay, we're all good.
No,
right?
I'm gonna raise your mic.
Cool. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle, right? There's a pre-Trump, there's a post-Trump, and the post-Trump Republican Party is never going to be the same again. I remember seeing one of the Lincoln Project people said something in their like Twitter bio, which was approximating like, one day everyone's going to wake up and they're going to say, I can't believe I supported this guy. That is never going to happen. And so to the extent that you're worried about like the country having as an example the success of a potential Trump presidency, or at least the electoral success, that at a bare minimum, and the fact that the Republican Party ain't going away anytime soon, should let you know that it's overdetermined. That's happening with or without a Trump failed presidency or a lucky success presidency, in my opinion.
So Hutch said something earlier, which I saw Econoboy react to visibly. I want him to weigh in on first, and then if we get Pisco to weigh in. But Hutch said, I asked if we were heading towards a worst case or near worst case scenario, and he said, he believes that Trump is going to try to do a lot of this unhinged stuff, but that he'll have to contend with the American system and be checked by Congress and by the courts. Econoboy, his face was not using its inside voice, and seemed to suggest that he disagreed with that. So Econoboy, you first, and then we'll get the legal side of it from Pisco. But do you agree or disagree, and why?
I am not confident whatsoever that the courts will be much help with Donald Trump. I think that the major things Trump wants to do, they will go to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court, I just think that the Supreme Court is going to side with Trump. Like, I don't really see a scenario like, okay, for instance, right? Let's just say that his nominees can't pass confirmation. Gaetz can't get through because he's, an alleged pedophile, kind of hurts your political career chances in theory. In theory, that is. In theory. But the point is, though, is that let's just say that happens, right? I literally do not know what is to stop Trump from just saying, well, these are all just acting appointments now. My understanding is that acting appointments still collect a salary. They can still make directives just like the actual sort of full appointed people are. And given that the Supreme Court seems to have given a lot of lip service to the idea that basically the president can just do whatever he wants in terms of personnel decisions, I just don't know what's to stop that from happening. And if that is the case, I don't know what's to stop the mass deportations using the military. I mean, you could say like maybe there's local autonomy concerns, but like my understanding is that the federal government has, especially according to this court, pretty much the ability to conduct law enforcement the way that the president says they can, right? And so I don't know what's to stop him from doing that. I could see maybe some constitutional or legal arguments with regards to universal tariffs. Like, can we say that it's a national security concern if you're just tariffing everyone? But I don't think Trump is literally going to tariff everyone. I think that he'll just tariff like basically like every conceivable good that he can, that there's not a specific interest group or like reason for him. Like, for instance, he's not going to tariff like goods coming from Saudi Arabia because he has a good relationship seemingly with the Saudi royal family. At least that would be my expectation. So you might see some exceptions like that. But I just don't see a world where the worst outcomes of Trump are really significantly checked by the courts. The thing that I was shaking my head to what Hutch said, especially, was the idea, however, that Trump could do these things and that the American people wouldn't have a strong negative reaction to it. I just think, look, he's getting 40% of the vote, 40% approval, literally no matter what. Like, I think I joked that he could grope a minor while saying the N-word and still get 40% of the vote. That was like one of the rumored controversies a few weeks ago. And
or
that's
at
true.
least make that person Secretary of Energy or something like that. Whoever does that.
I mean, Mark Robinson, he got 40% of the vote in his election. I think that's about the floor of the average GOP candidate. It's about 35-40% of the vote. But look, if the Democratic nominee gets 57% of the vote, that's like an actually insane landslide on a national level. That's better than Obama. And I do think people, when they go into a grocery store and they see, oh yeah, we just don't have strawberries like at all anymore, and they see like actual like material shortages, they see the impact of RFK's weird legislation that makes food more expensive. They see the tariffs compound on top of that. They see unemployment and inflation going up, which is something the people were so pissed off about that even though those things aren't problems anymore, they still voted out the Democrats. They see those exact same problems times 2 under Trump. I just think a really sufficiently large portion of people are going to be pissed off about these things that the Democrats will probably do very well in the upcoming elections, even though Trump presents himself as a strong leader.
So before we go to Pisco, I do want, I guess, Hutch to respond to that part, which is, I guess he wasn't necessarily disagreeing that there would be some sort of institutional check on Trump in term 2, but this idea that that Trump, Trump, if he engages in excess, that it will provoke. It's more likely to provoke a landslide defeat in the midterms and perhaps the next presidential election. Hutch, do you want to respond to that?
No, it's just if he is successful at expanding his cult of personality, then I think that people will find a way to still approving of him, much like what's going on with like Milei in Argentina right now. They had I think the poverty rate jumped up to like 55% in Argentina. And what they're describing, what Milei has been telling people is that it's like shock therapy for the economy over there. And Elon and Vivek have been using similar language to describe their plans.
Yeah, about short-term economic harm, right? Or economic hardship as a consequence of their cuts.
And that's exactly, I think, the cope that you're going to see from people like Rob Noor. So if he does these tariffs and if he does do mass deportation, and we see the price of goods go up a little bit, we see a bit of inflation, you're definitely 1000% going to see people like Rob say, well, we're just paying a price in the short term, but it had to be done. And I'm not saying that that's going to be compelling. Like, I do think that
oh my God, Hutch, wait, what if you're right? And then a Democrat, I can see it right now. I'm looking into the future. You're right. That's exactly what happens. And then a Democrat wins in the landslide and improves the economy. And then Rob Noor says, well, that's just the long-term effects of what Trump did in his first term. Oh God,
exactly
I can see it.
100%.
Somebody clip this, put this in posterity, and when the four of us are in the internment camps, when the four of us are languishing in Gitmo, if there's still an internet, please play this in our honor.
I do think that these conditions that would arise from these actions obviously present an obvious and enormous opportunity for Democrats to seize on that moment. I just don't want to bank on that happening. Like, I just want to be vigilant. I just want to be mindful that we can't just necessarily expect these things to happen.
So somebody in chat asked you a direct question, Hutch, and then we're going to again turn to Pisco to discuss the legal and institutional checks on Trump that whether what he says or what he thinks will be in the second term. But Chicken Marsala says, so Hutch just thinks we're stuck in a forever right-wing dictatorship now?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying just like what you were talking about, like, is it possible that they have another good election in 2026 and 2028? Yes. And like, I'm cautioning against people expecting immediate improvement of these circumstances. I think we just need to view politics as a long-term project, and it may be the case that we go through a difficult period for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. And what I'm saying is that we need to keep our energy through these times, and it's going to be difficult to do that. But I'm also not saying that I think that this is necessarily going to happen.
Fair. All right. So Pisco, as the lawyer in the group, what about this idea that Donald Trump, if he tries to go ham, will have to contend with the Supreme Court of the United States? They, in some ways, meaningfully checked him in the past. It seems to be that they are less inclined to do so when he was out of office, but now he's about to be in office again, right? And we might have an awkward situation here. What do you think about the court as an institutional check against Trump in the second term?
Yeah, I just want to take a step back and say, listen, I don't consider myself an expert on a lot of these matters. I am a lawyer, but I don't say that that's necessarily expert advice, but this is just kind of my take on what you're talking about here are like checks on the president's authority. I would start broader and say, listen, there are still some meaningful checks on the president's authority. A lot of those are undermined by partisanship and the fact that across both the different branches of government and between the federal government and state governments, it's not really a power in the structural sense. It's more of a partisan check, but those structures still exist. So state governments, I think, are a big check on the presidency. You've already started to see people like Whitmer, people like Newsom, and other Democratic governors who are absolutely going to like do their best to make sure things are run well and smoothly. Those are real checks. And most of what you see every day, you know, your day to day, that's a lot of that is state government, state control, that kind of stuff. So that's a meaningful check on the president's authority. You're starting to see even the Senate, you know, I don't think that the Senate's going to be a major check on the president's power, especially when it's under control of the other Republicans. But there may be some limits that we find exist on the excesses. I don't know about the Gaetz pick. I would still predict, if you had to make me do a bet, that they would try with Gaetz. But there are some things I think even this Senate probably would not abide. In terms of checks, though, there's those two. I think the House is exclusively in his pocket. On the courts, I am fearful. I think that there would be some efforts by lower federal courts and maybe even the Supreme Court to, on the margin, disagree with him here and there. Something in the realm of like, think about, you know, regular disagreements about whether a law gives him such and such authority or whether a certain provision of a statute they try to pass is constitutional. I think you're going to see the courts, by and large, siding with MAGA, especially the Supreme Court. What you're talking about are the big power plays by Trump, the big bad stuff. And I'm scared there. And I agree with Econoboy, frankly, a little bit there. I think that the Supreme Court has shown its hand that when it comes to areas within the president's, call it exclusive or arguably exclusive authority, the court is very loath to step in or even to allow Congress to step in. I want to give you a tangible example of this in a way that is tracking some of our conversations and that hopefully we can discuss more. That is in the case of the proposal to denaturalize certain American citizens. Have you guys heard about this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So for context, though, because chat might not, are you talking about the incoming Trump administration's proposal? They said that they're going to have a massive denaturalization process. Stephen Miller is talking about this. As far as I know, this is something that's basically unheard of, but you could clarify.
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you who don't know, naturalization is the process by which citizenship is granted or vested in individuals in the country. Citizenship you can think of as a membership of a club. There are different ways to obtain citizenship through blood, right, relations, and there was a common law rule codified into the 14th Amendment, which states that all persons born in the United States or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States, so long as they're subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and of the state in which they reside. That is one of the rules of naturalization. And it's long been understood that the power to naturalize is not the power to take away citizenship, that Congress can grant citizenship, but Congress cannot take away citizenship. That's why, for the worst crimes, we really don't have banishment as a concept anymore for like the punishment of crime. Citizenship with it carries a lot of rights, and one of them is the right to stay in the country. However, so that's kind of the field. And long ago, in a case called Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court decided that even if you're born in the United States to people born from another country, and more recent decisions, even if they're born to illegal illegal aliens, you are still considered subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and you're still a born citizenship under the 14th Amendment. However, there is a common law exception. There are various common law exceptions in the 14th Amendment. The first is for American Indians. American Indians born in tribal territories were not traditionally considered subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. They had to pass a law in Congress to extend U.S. citizenship to American Indians born under tribal authorities. And there are two other exceptions. One is individuals born to ambassadors. So if you're pregnant and you're an ambassador, or you're married to an ambassador, if your kid is born, you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And the third is invaders, occupiers, alien enemies in occupation of the United States or of any country. You can think back in the old days, if you had a sort of vengeful king from another land coming over trying to take over your land, and you're having some kids there, we don't want to grant citizenship to the invaders. So I put out the pieces there. Consider the following scenario, because there's another law that maps onto that invaders exception. That's called the Alien Enemies Act, which is still on the books today. Suppose that Donald Trump does the following. I declare that the real government of Mexico is the cartels in Mexico. Well, the Constitution explicitly gives the president unilateral decision of recognizing foreign governments. So Trump says, I find that the true government in Mexico are the cartels. And I'm determining that the cartels are sending, as invaders in a warlike fashion, people to go across the borders in hostile occupation of our country. Now, this is a perversion of what invasion meant under the historical analysis. What we meant in terms of invasion, what the framers meant was like another country sending troops to take over and annex parts of land. They're not talking about people who are just breaking immigration law. That's not what historically it meant. Do you have any confidence in the court stepping in at all to issue an order to the president or to the DHS saying you may not recognize the cartels as the government of Mexico, or we do not agree with your emergency. We do not agree that these people are actually not invaders in the historical sense. We know more than the executive. We're not going to defer to the executive in terms of who is an alien enemy or who is an invader. We can't say anything about that because it's not the judicial role. Doesn't that seem likely to you? Do you really think that this Supreme Court is going to say, no, Trump, you're wrong about whether these people are alien enemies? And just to be clear, if there's a determination that certain groups of people are alien enemies, doesn't matter if they're green card holders, doesn't matter if they're here legally. The Alien Enemies Act lets you just kick them out of the country. So that's a kind of example where I'm showing you there's some good faith, like common law exception to some rule that allows you to say, hey, you're not a citizen of the United States because you're born to an alien enemy. And the determination that would lead you to fall under the exception would carry, probably under this court, a great deal of deference to the executive. And I can't meaningfully see, honestly, this Supreme Court stepping in and saying, no, we know more about foreign diplomatic relations and the nature of who's coming across the border than Donald Trump does. And that's just me being serious, putting a real example there for you to get scared about.
Before anybody responds to this, assuming they do, Get Out responds and says, do you even need to do that extreme thing, though? Cartels can be designated as an enemy non-state authority and do the same from there. And before you respond, Pisco, I will say I have heard, as I'm sure everyone on this panel has heard, that there has been talk among prominent Republicans and members of the Trump campaign and the incoming Trump administration about designating Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations. If they do that, would the Aliens and Sedition Act would that apply? Would that hypothetical still emerge without going so far as to say
the Alien Enemies Act refers to foreign
Act,
nations and foreign governments? But if Trump said, yeah, these guys they're a government. Do you think that he would bring along probably 95% of his party if he said, hey, these cartels people, they actually control areas
Yeah, they're the de
in
facto
Mexico.
government.
They're a de
Yeah.
facto government. I am declaring them and recognizing them as a government with which we are at war. I am declaring war with that government in those lands. And I want to help. They're already talking, by the way, of using military force to attack in Mexico. And so I don't put this like just to get within the four corners of whatever legislative authority or constitutional exception to citizenship that he wants to use. He's going to say whatever he needs to. And so long as he takes advantages of those areas and his lawyers know where the courts are weak, where the courts want to defer, that to me is a huge red flag and danger.
Yeah, the Solicitor General is John Sauer, who was the one who bit the bullet to the D.C. Circuit Court and then in front of the Supreme Court that perhaps one of the president's constitutional authorities or constitutional powers would be to assassinate political rivals, or rather that it could constitute an official act for which he could not be criminally prosecuted. And that would be the person who would litigate any sort of Supreme Court challenge in front of the Supreme
and just
Court.
to be, and then on this, I know I've talked for a while, but like,
Yeah.
that's just an example to highlight a lot of these dangers. I could see the similar things happening with use of military within the United States as an exception to posse comitatus. You're typically not allowed to use military domestically. There's a law that prevents it, except for like the National Guard in certain circumstances. But, is the Supreme Court going to step in and say, we know more than the president in terms of the internal and external threats of the country, such to wouldn't you expect them to say something like, it's a political question? We cannot possibly contradict the president in terms of his determinations of who is a threat and who's not a threat and whether or not there's an invasion or not an invasion.
Well,
We're the court.
Here's what you're missing, Pisco, okay? Because his supporters like him because there were no new wars on his watch during his first term. So if he declares war on Mexico, his voters are obviously going to push back against that. Rob is going to be super against that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because that would be very.
I honestly can't
neoconish.
tell if you're being ironic.
Yeah, he is. He's being very.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that would be very neoconish, wouldn't it? Hutch, that would be something that a Bush would do. That's something that a Cheney would do. That's very Machiavellian, and of course, principled MAGA Republicans would immediately object.
We're going to see levels of Djangoism it's going to be like immediate post September 11th. If he fucking I'm not saying he's going to, but like if he invaded Mexico, they're going to be behind that 100%. And
More
all
like
this no new
Django
war shit.
Unchained.
Yeah.
Am I right?
There you go. Well, I don't know what that's to do with war, but whatever.
Well, it was a pun. Shut up. Okay, you're overthinking it.
It's part of a troubling amount of like dereliction of duty of the courts, frankly. And even though you would think, by the way, that like getting rid of the Chevron doctrine would be like, oh, the courts are going to start analyzing. No, they're going to apply that to regulations they don't like because they're very deregulatory. But the court, even when it was a more normal court, was loath to directly order the president to do anything. They don't like to do that because they don't want to be faced with a Josiah on the other side who says non-acquiescence. We're not going to listen. That's why they're loath often to order the president to do anything. And I don't think this court, frankly, has the stones to order Donald Trump to do something when it really comes down to it, right? Let's say the Supreme Court says, we are ordering you, Trump, to release these American citizens in your custody in the detention camp in Texas.
Yeah.
What
What's
then?
he gonna? Right. And I mean, I should say that many of people in Trump's camp have previously advocated for defying the court in such, I shouldn't say in such a scenario, but just as a general proposition if it gets in the way of policy initiatives of the Trump administration. So that's
Lefties
on
were
the
doing
table.
that this time around with Biden.
No, listen,
Yep.
and again, you all know my very deep and complicated feelings about the relationship between the Supreme Court and the presidency, but it's not just us. I just want to point out that even those on the right are also a fan of, if this court tries to impede Donald Trump, then we should defy them. So Conboy, Hutch, do you guys have anything that you want to weigh in on that? Are you persuaded or sufficiently frightened by what Pisco offered? Do you disagree with it out of hand?
I really appreciate that insight. This is obviously just so outside of my wheelhouse. And so to hear you explain it like that is definitely enlightening. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, denaturalization is one of those things that I'm just, I mean, ending birthright citizenship would be, I think, a pretty insane thing to do, but I don't think that would actually inspire a crazy level of opposition just in and of itself. But the idea of denaturalizing citizens, I think that would be. There's tens of millions of people in this country who are naturalized citizens, right? Like this is a lot of people who maybe, let's just say, oh, it's only some small portion. It's only like, oh, a few tens of thousands of people who are, actually officially targeted for denaturalization. I think that's a radical signal to send to every one of those 10 million people. It's like, look, we were told when we were citizens that was like, that was the ball game. Like we went through the process legally. You hear this from a lot of right-leaning immigrants. You hear like, look, we came here legally. That's why we deserve to be here. And these undocumented immigrants deserve to get deported, right? This is what you'll hear from so many right-leaning immigrants who are citizens. But and again, it's not going to be all of them, but I would have to imagine that some portion of right-leaning immigrants or people from right-leaning immigrant families would look at that and be like, this is wild that this guy is actually trying to do this. This is actually insane. But maybe
I
not.
would almost agree that I think it's more likely for self-preservation reasons to start with other people or to start with like future people. He might make a rule that says, hey, if you're born to illegal immigrants going forward, we're not going to
Right.
grant you citizenship. Like I could very easily see him doing that.
I can
Or
see that.
saying something like, hey, we're going to start here. We're not going to focus on on people who have been here this amount of time. Those would just be for self-preservation. I'm just going off of what they're saying and giving an example of why I think the courts, where the stress points are. And the stress points are not trying to wholesale tear down doctrines, but to misuse like exceptions and determinations of facts by the president that the courts are going to, in bad faith, defer to and just
It's all made up. It's all made up. This is the argument that we've had for a while, Pisco, is that my opinion is that every single judge is just making shit up and is basically just like doing what they think is right, and I don't, and in a lot of regards. Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, like if you're an originalist, like let's just say that you actually are a good originalist, right? Like, you do all this historical research and you really try to genuinely understand that. Like you have to make a values-based decision as to why that's even a good framework to use for evaluating these decisions. And that value-based reason is going to be, determined by some subjective morality that you have. And so, my opinion, and that's one of the reasons I don't have a lot of faith in the conservative court is like, I just think these guys are radically right-wing conservatives. And so, I would agree in general. Like I'm very skeptical of, and I guess the reason I say we disagree on this is because it's like, if a liberal justice were to, if someone were up for confirmation and a liberal justice were to say, yeah, I'm a liberal, so I'm just going to vote for the liberal shit, I'd be like, yeah, whatever. That's what all the other judges are doing. Who gives a shit if you actually just come out and say that? That's what's happening, right? But to your point, though, we share our skepticism. We share a skepticism of the nature of the court doing these things, and to your I was going to say to your point about people feeling like interpersonally aggrieved by this just because it might directly target them. That's one of the reasons why I point to like, it was such an effective attack line against the Democrats. Like, go to the grocery store and shit's more expensive. Shit at the grocery store is going to get way more expensive if he does these things. And if he targets naturalized citizens, that's just so many tens of millions of people that are going to feel personally targeted by that or will be personally targeted by that. My wife's parents, Anna Kasparian, Cenk Uygur, so many media personalities like Elon Musk himself, Trump's wife. Like there's so much hypocrisy and room for criticism in this regard. All those right-leaning Cubans that live in Florida, like how could you see Trump doing something like this and not be like, wow, and it's not going to be all of them. Some of them will be delusional no matter what. But like, Pisco yourself, obviously, like, there's so many people who just are directly implicated in such a policy that I think that alone would change a lot of minds. Even if he does what you're describing, like, oh, in the future, naturalized citizens will be fucked over by this. Like, oh, so you're saying like, if my uncle starts a life here, his kids aren't going to be American citizens. Like if he comes over from Cuba, like there's going to be a lot of conversations like this if that actually gets pursued, which to be fair, Stephen Miller has said that will be pursued. So, we'll see.
So for the
last thing real quick, just on the point of the judicial stuff, the other way in context that this might come up is the recess appointments, where there is a provision in the Constitution that states that the president can in times of extraordinary occasions, convene both houses or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of the adjournment, may adjourn them. So there are provisions in the Constitution where the president can forcibly call Congress, call them to session, and then adjourn them, and he could try to use that to use the recess appointment process if the Senate doesn't want to play ball. And so, if that were ever to come to the Supreme Court, you think the Supreme Court is going to say, actually, Trump, you can't do what the Constitution says maybe you're allowed to do, and bring them all to Congress, then immediately adjourn them in bad faith.
Before I respond to close the loop on the judges thing, in our last 30 minutes, I first have a question. Do you all have an echo when the screen is up?
No.
Okay. All right. So we're going to try this. So I just want to say on the topic of recess appointments, a couple of things just real quick to close the loop on this. Some Senate Republicans, some prominent Senate Republicans have indicated some misgivings about the recess appointment loophole that Trump seeks to exploit. Many others have supported the idea. Donald Trump has a mandate, and if the Senate Republicans won't play ball, if our Republicans won't do it, then the president's got to do what he's got to do. I do want to say, and Pisco, correct me if I'm wrong, when President Obama was in office, the Supreme Court blocked him when he tried a similar stunt to work around Republican obstruction of his appointments, right? And they actually ruled against him.
Well, that was they did, but essentially the whole situation there was the use of the pro forma session, which is there used to be recess appointments all the time. Right. And the Senate did some very interesting rules shenanigans, where what they did was they have one senator come in and on every day, because the Constitution says after a certain amount of period of time, after 3 days, on a fourth day of adjournment, you have to be in a recess. And to prevent that from happening, they just have one senator come and say, hey, we're going to do the pro forma session. And that was a way of getting around that and not having any way for Obama to put in recess appointments. And that's been their practice ever since that time. And so it went to the Supreme Court, and everyone's like, yep, the president, you can't say when the Senate's in recess or not. The question here is, could Trump, if he wanted to, use another part, Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution to forcibly convene in bad faith, right? There is no extraordinary occasion. And he would only do this, by the way, if he couldn't get his own appointments through his own Republican Congress and his own Republican Senate. So think about how extraordinary that would be. It would be, he would only do this if the Senate didn't have the votes to allow him to do actual recess appointments, didn't have the votes for the nominees he wanted, and so he doesn't have enough votes for the process that he wants.
Does it take a simple majority to adjourn the Senate, or is it a filibuster-proof majority?
It's going to be the Senate majority leader's call, but as a practical matter, if a majority of the Senate doesn't want it, they could probably block it. And
but what I'm curious on, and I don't know this, is if Democrats in the minority can block it because Republicans don't have a filibuster-proof majority. I wonder if it's subject to filibuster. I doubt it. I feel like
to filibuster
adjourning the Senate. Yeah.
I don't think it is, but
that would be my gut instinct as well. Last thing on the judges thing, just to point this out, a bit of good news, because it's Trump freaking out and Senate Democrats trying to make wise use of the time they have left. Chuck Schumer is doing his best to confirm the remainder of President Biden's judicial nominees. Now, Republicans are doing everything in their power to slow walk it, and they do have the ability to slow walk it. They just don't have the ability, if all the votes are amassed, to stop it. They would need to, peel off votes from the Democrats, people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And so far, the Democrats have been able to get their way over the past few days.
Yeah, Manchin recently signaled that he had previously been reluctant to do that, but he has signaled an openness in the last week, I think.
Yes, that is very good. Yes, good point. I'm pointing that out, Hutch, that Manchin is at least indicating that it's going to be hard to pull him away. Previously, what he said was he was not going to vote for another judge that didn't have Republican support. Obviously, Republicans, to the extent that any were willing to back any of Biden's nominees in the past, are definitely not inclined to do so now, because Trump is publicly pressuring them not to. So Manchin,
a loser. Can I just say, what a loser. These people don't understand what's coming, and they don't really truly understand the stakes until it's hit them in the head and like, oh shit, Trump is going to get another term. They have this belief. It's both the Supreme Court, as we've been talking about, and these kind of centrist Democrats, the ones who are like withholding key votes. They don't get it. They don't get why the urgency exists until they're stuck with a crisis. And then all of a sudden they find their conscience. It's loser mentality. It's bullshit. And we shouldn't stand for it. We need killers.
Again, metaphorically, yeah. And it's true. And Kyrsten Sinema, I should say, voted with the Republicans against one of President Biden's nominees earlier today, but was defeated because a sufficient number of Republicans didn't turn up. J.D. Vance has not been in attendance because he said he has been interviewing potential future FBI directors. We're going to talk about that in a second. But yeah, so Chuck Schumer is doing his best to run out the clock and cram through as many of these nominees as possible. So yeah, good on Democrats for attempting to do this, and also very hypocritical of Republicans because when Trump lost in 2020 during their lame duck session, this is exactly what they did. Yep. They're like, well, Trump is still president. We still have the majority. They're his nominees, blah, blah, blah. But now, again, when the shoe is on the other foot, they take the unprincipled stance because, of course, the GOP are hypocritical losers who should be relentlessly made fun of, especially if they're politicians. So that's it for the judiciary. Anything else from Econoboy or Hutch on that topic before we turn to some other things?
No.
Okay. So the other thing, a couple of things I was curious what your guys' take on was, I guess we should start with the more substantive thing right here. Let me first add audio. But we do have an update on the ethics report from the bipartisan but Republican-led House Ethics Committee. So my question is, do you all hear an echo now? Is there an echo? An echo?
No.
Nope. Okay, here we go. This is the ranking member of the Republican-led bipartisan House Ethics Committee talking about a recent vote about whether to release the ethics report into Matt Gaetz.
I walked out of this committee without making one and walked back to my office, but it has since come to my attention that, in fact, we had agreed that we were not going to discuss what had transpired at the meeting, but it has come to my attention that the chairman has since betrayed the process by disclosing our deliberations within moments after walking out of the committee, and he has implied that there was an agreement of the committee not to disclose the report. That is an untrue, to the extent that that suggests that the committee was in agreement or that we had a consensus on that, that is inaccurate. And I will say that a vote was taken. As many of you know, this committee is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans, 5 Dems, 5 Republicans, which means that in order to affirmatively move something forward, somebody has to cross party lines and vote with the other side, which happens a lot, by the way, and we often vote unanimously. That did not happen in today's vote, and I do not want the American public or anyone else to think that Mr. Guest's characterization of what transpired today would be some sort of indication that the committee had unanimity or consensus on this issue.
So what this amounts to, just to be clear, is as of this moment, Republicans on the bipartisan, Republican-led House Ethics Committee are not voting to disclose the report about Matt Gaetz to the public or to the Senate Judiciary Committee at this time. So right now, to be very clear, Republicans are trying to bury this report. What are your thoughts?
I just want to say, I believe, and to correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't know much about the ethics committee before the last couple of weeks, but I believe they're actually really good about not leaking stuff. So I wouldn't expect this to leak. Maybe if it was another subcommittee, but it really does seem that the members of this subcommittee take like they treat it as sacred and they don't ever leak this stuff. So yeah,
Well, I was just gonna say right there to your point, that's why the ranking member issued this statement, is because the chairman, last name Guest, I can't remember his first name, the Republican, he did take the unprecedented step of leaking to the press details that were apparently erroneous, they were false, about their internal deliberations. So now I wonder, have Democrats are just not inclined to do this, but I wonder now that that precedent's been set, like, okay, motherfucker, so we'll start talking more. Do you think that that's a possibility?
I mean, this is an insane thing. Like, I'm sorry, but like the Democrats on that committee are making an incredible mistake by not leaking that report if they have the opportunity to. Like, I don't care about the precedent. We're about to have a criminal as the attorney general, right? We're about to have not only a criminal as the attorney general, alleged criminal, but somebody who is potentially guilty of the worst crimes, some of the worst crimes that we can imagine. And it's not just that, like, it's also relevant information to think about the implications of Matt Gaetz being the attorney general as well, that like Matt Gaetz would be a disaster as attorney general, in part because of his, clear lack of, morality and principles on display, obviously, in this investigation as well. And so Democrats on that committee, like, what are we doing here? We are staring down the barrel of, like, again, what is perhaps going to be the most challenging and difficult moment in our institutional history since the Civil War. And we're just going to sit there on a report that could make some type of a difference because what? Like, we think it's uncouth to leak it? Like, what the fuck could possibly be the actually good reason to not leak this report? I don't know. It seems weird to me. It seems bizarre.
Hutch, you have anything more before we turn to Pisco on this? What
No,
do you think?
I wasn't making any kind of like a moral judgment. I was just saying, according to what I read, leaks from the ethics committee just don't happen. So if people are expecting like Democrats to come out there and leak, I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on that. I don't know. I think I agree with Econoboy on this one.
Yeah. What about you, Pisco? What do you think, man?
In terms of what I care about with respect to Matty Gaetz's qualifications for Attorney General, the stuff about his accusations, it's obviously incredibly serious, all that shit, but it's not the thing that most concerns me. I just have to tell you, the thing that's most concerning is that Matt Gaetz is going to be a hatchet man for Donald Trump and is going to corrupt the Department of Justice. That is what is concerning. And the fact number two, I guess, under that is he has no fucking business leading the Department of Justice. He's never managed tens of thousands of employees. He's never been a part of a criminal investigation, except being a subject of a criminal investigation. He's never been in court on behalf of a government, any government. He doesn't really have any large, big attorney experience on which to draw upon. So he's deeply unqualified. I think this whole thing about the report is more a little bit of a fugazi, a dance for the Republicans, who I think congressionally pretty much all hate him for, not for ideological reasons, but for personal reasons and for colleague reasons.
Imploding the McCarthy
Yeah,
speaker
so I almost think that the Republicans in the House and the Senate are doing this little dance in somewhat concert, maybe a little bit even with the Democrats, to play up, this report. Are they going to release it? Are they not going to release it? Are they going to extend their investigation? Because I think a lot of Senate Republicans, frankly, want to vote him down. But
So
I'm not saying that they're going to. I'm not.
Go
saying
ahead,
they're going
Hutch.
to.
Oh, I was just going to say, just as sort of a very easy prediction to make, I think these confirmation hearings that we're going to have for these candidates are going to be the most insane confirmation hearings in history. It's going to be fucking nuts. Like the first couple months of this administration, it's just going to be so nuts. So, hey,
I'm not sure.
free content, right, boys?
No, 100%. It's genuinely going to be insane. I will say though, doesn't this really undermine the idea that Republicans are going to meaningfully check Trump? I mean, he's not even inaugurated yet, but he's exerting. I mean, he might as well be the president in terms of the level of grip that he has in the GOP. Because consider what Hutch and Pisco have just said, which is that Matt Gaetz, number one, is not a member of Congress anymore. Number two, when he was a member of Congress, was not particularly well liked. Number three, the ethics investigation into Matt Gaetz has persisted even after the DOJ dropped their criminal investigation.
And so even after McCarthy was unseated as Speaker.
Correct.
In fact, that's the stated reason why he was unseated, according to McCarthy, is because Gaetz wanted him to kill this ethics investigation. He didn't.
Which, to be clear, predated McCarthy's speakership. This investigation was
started under Trump.
Right.
Oh my God.
Yes. And so combine that with the fact that you have had Senate Republicans publicly say that they want to see the report, right? So if you consider all of the all of the headwinds that would push towards, like, of course they're going to release the fucking report. The fact that they did not vote to do so, to me, I mean, Occam's razor would indicate it's because they're so afraid of Trump that even though they probably really want to fuck this guy over, that they wouldn't vote to release.
I don't know if you can read
report.
that much into it. The report isn't done. It's like for all intents and purposes done, but they might want to wait to like get the report ready or build it up, or maybe you're right, Josiah, and maybe they want to wait until the Senate requests it. I agree with you though, Josiah. This is a big test. If Trump can get through Gaetz as a nomination, then you can bet congressional Republicans will be absolutely zero check on any kind of power that he wants to exercise because Gaetz is one of the most offensive nominations in the history of the Republic. It would be like nominating fucking Al Capone to head the DOJ. He's such a blasphemous pick, such a piece of shit that, yeah, if they get him through.
Reportedly, that's why in part he's doing it. It's not just because, so reportedly, there are two reasons. Number one is Matt Gaetz. When other people were lobbying Trump to be attorney general, Matt Gaetz was the one who's had the right answer because he reportedly said, quote, "I'll go in there and start cutting fucking heads." And that was the answer that Trump wanted. Number one. Number two, to your point, reportedly, it's about breaking the GOP further it's forcing them to take cough medicine effectively. Like, I don't care how bitter this tastes. The fact that it is bitter for you only compels Trump to want to cram it down.
He gets off on it. There's something sexual about it.
No, 100%. And so like that's why I am like to invoke Rob Noor again. Rob Noor was like, "Nah, I would love Matt Gaetz to be attorney general, however the fuck he does." But he's like, "I don't think that it will happen because I don't think the Republicans will confirm him." And I'm like, "Man, I wish I had your confidence, but I am not confident. I think they will. I think that there's a really good chance that they do confirm him."
Well, Pisco, maybe can I want to ask Pisco a question, like, because So I do think that, if the House is 221, like if the House is like 221 to 214 or 15 or whatever it is, 214, I do imagine there will be enough sort of New York Republicans or California Republicans where like just legislatively just getting rid of Social Security or like destroying the IRA or things like that would probably be pretty difficult. But I just don't like when it comes to these appointments, literally, I don't know what stops Trump from just saying, "Yeah, Matt, don't even go to that confirmation hearing. I'll just make you acting AG anyway. Who gives a shit?" Like, I just don't, I literally do not know what is to stop him from just not giving a fuck about this confirmation process at all.
I think stuff like that is way more likely this time around because he was found guilty in a criminal court of 34 felonies and Americans reelected him. So I think he probably right now just feels so emboldened to just go.
I don't even know if that would be illegal.
Just do whatever.
Like, according to this Supreme Court, I feel like if that was challenged, like, hey, like the president can't just completely ignore the advice and consent process and just call everyone an acting appointment. I do not know what legal logic the conservative court would employ to say
I think there's some legislation
outside of the legal framework. I just don't think I think he took a shit on all of our norms the first time around. And I think this time around, there's every reason to think he's going to go so much harder.
Well, he was rewarded for it. He was rewarded for it. To Hutch's point, I mean, 2020 was a referendum on COVID, right? That was the only thing that sank Trump, in my opinion. His violation of norms during his first administration meant nothing, I think, or rather, at least considerably less than it should have to the American people. I think if he'd continued to ride the coattails of the Obama economy, which is precisely what he did, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, for the first 3 years, if that went into his fourth year, I think that the American people, and of course, I know like Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks, I know they're like, don't blame the voters, don't blame the voters. And you all may disagree with this, but I'm not running for office, so I can be candid. I do think the voters are in part to blame. Yes, the Democratic politicians, obviously, because they're supposed to persuade voters to vote for them. But this idea that voters don't have, agency and power, and therefore responsibility to use what little power they have in terms of their vote share to the best of their ability. Hell yeah. So yes, if you do not prioritize democracy, if you're lazy and inattentive to these things, yeah, I do think that you deserve blame in this. And so I am not confident in the American electorate to say that if, if 2020 had not been the day of COVID, Trump would have gotten his second term. And Trump just got a third term, even though he's more unhinged than ever. So I'm totally with Hutch. I think that we are truly at Trump's mercy and the Republican Party's mercy for the next 4 years, for all intents and purposes. Anybody else want to weigh in on that before I've got one last thing to?
Well, I asked Pisco. Pisco, I don't know if you know much about this acting appointment stuff, but like it just seems to me that there's just like every reason to think that this is ultimately an option that he can employ.
Yeah, so there are some like procedural limitations on who can be enacting. Typically, they have to be like an employee already of the government. But I'm not disagreeing with you that they could try to shoehorn Matt Gaetz into something, and then
they could fucking hire him as part of the DOJ, and then as soon as there are some like practical things that might it's an inferior status.
There are reasons why he might want his full blown, and I think even like certain term limits that occur. I don't think that it's necessarily, and I think the pay is less too. So just to be put all the cards out there, I don't disagree with you that he could try to put it through in an acting position, but there are reasons why the prestige of that might not be what you want, and there are some untested legal issues about the extent to which you can do that, and then some just practical considerations why he might not want to do it. But I don't disagree that he could, if he wanted to, find some way to shoehorn him in. But it could lead to some issues. Someone could challenge his appointment and lead to a bunch of litigation for things that he tries to do. It could delay them. So that's kind of the reason. It's like a practical thing.
So,
and
last, Hutch, do you want to weigh in on that at all? If not, I've got one last thing for us to talk about in the time we have left.
Nope.
All right. So when we all jumped in here, we started to talk about, or Pisco started to mention, the future for left-wing liberal, I don't even know what we're calling it, pro-democracy, anti-MAGA, whatever it is, media, alternate media. Destiny's talking about this a lot. Tyler Cohen's talking about this a lot. David Pakman and others. As a matter of fact, David Pakman and Tyler Cohen and Kenny from Too Raw, Too Real, or some of the people that I know about, are launching this platform called Chorus. And they're starting to do fundraising for it, but I think it doesn't have a lot of information other than it's going to be to try to like platform up and coming content creators and things like that. Destiny's obviously talked about his starting a network. Luke Beasley has mentioned stuff like that in the past. What do you want to see moving forward from left-wing media, political commentariat, and others as we go into this next 4 years? So I'll start with Econoboy.
Then what do I want to see from just like content creators specifically?
Yeah. And again, people, streamers, people like Tyler Cohen, like running the whole gamut, people who engage in political commentary.
I think in part I'd want to see them put some of their money where their mouth is. I think as controversial as Destiny is as a figure, he really does deserve credit for all these canvassing efforts. Like he does invest seemingly a lot of his own money, especially for the initial canvassing efforts that were done. This is not
$50,000 for the 2022 Georgia.
Right. And the thing about like take that as an example, like 50 grand, that is not a so credit to Destiny, but I think that one of the reasons Destiny's willing to do that is because he recognizes like this is not a meaningful amount of money for me. Like I can afford to spend $50,000 on a canvassing effort once or twice a year, right? And there's so many wealthy content creators who, I guess you could say like nominally feel passionate about politics. Like I don't have $50,000 that I can just like blow on a canvassing effort that might make the difference in some of these swing races, especially in the lead up to the midterms. So, I'd love to see investment in shows, sure. But I'd also love to see investment in more things like, the DGG canvassing efforts from other content creators, not just hosting fundraisers, not just linking to, hey, if you want to volunteer, here's a link to some other organization. Like, no, like really try to mass mobilize your various distributed audiences, right? That's something that I do think is important. And I think that is something that, to Destiny's point, in terms of why he got involved in this in the first place, like, Hassan's a lost cause, but like just thinking about it hypothetically, like if he told all of his people, like, hey, we're going to canvass for this congressional candidate in this purple district at this time. Like, you could get 1,000 people to show up and you could knock on tens of thousands of doors, and that would be like an incredible in-kind help to that person. And it doesn't have to be Hassan, obviously, but it could be a lot of these distributed content creators. Similar to, what was that event that like you had like Emma Vigeland, Vosh, and Destiny all go to when they talked to Rokana?
The progressive victory. And unfortunately, that I
Like
should
something
say-
like that, hopefully.
Yeah, but so the problem with that, before we turn to Hutch, is I was there for that, and I was really hopeful, and not to throw her under the bus, or Destiny. Vosh actually, unironically, was the best behaved of the three of them on stage, because even though he obviously doesn't personally like Destiny, he probably likes Emma Vigeland a lot.
Right.
He was willing to set all that aside, at least in the moment, to have like this like friendly dynamic on stage, or at least civil. Emma was looking for a fight, and then I think that provoked a fight in Destiny, and the whole thing kind of collapsed before our very eyes. And I actually talked about this a bit with Steven earlier. I'll save that for my part. I'm sorry. So
Well,
Hutch,
I recognize that. I was just going to say the last thing was that I just hope that especially with Trump probably being literally 10 times as insane as he was in the first term, which is something that's literally unimaginable. We can't imagine what that looks like. I would just hope that people like Vosh and Destiny and Emma, guys, who gives a shit if you have these marginal disagreements on policy? Yeah, Destiny called you a retard at some point, I guess. And like, yeah, you called him this. Like, we just really need to lock the fuck in. We can't be having this bullshit anymore. We have to lock the fuck in as a community. I can do my very small part, but for these bigger content creators, that's what I would hope that they would be able to do over the next 2 years. Perhaps that's wishful thinking.
So Hutch, let me ask you, because you started to change your content up a bit, the format of it. You obviously blew the dust off your YouTube channel. You're putting out daily content now. Not just in terms of, I suppose I'd like to see like to hear what you plan to do for the next 4 years, but what do you want to see out of the left-wing political commentariat moving forward?
I think there needs to be a lot of cross-pollination. I think like initially in the Trump era, there was a push to just have our separate silos, not engage with centrist right-wingers, these kinds of things. And I think that's just not an option this time around. Dude, the DMs keep showing up on my screen when you guys do that, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's a clip I can put it, I can actually link it and just kind of show you, like, this is a really good example of someone with a left-wing perspective going into like a super right-wing space and just putting on a master class of like how to put out like really compelling messaging. So I'll just let that speak, actually, that clip speak for me. And just, this is the kind of stuff that I want to see. I want to see left-leaning.
Do you hear an echo? I'm just going to keep asking that question. You do hear an echo?
Absolutely.
All right, hang on.
Yeah, we do.
Hold on. All right, hold on. We're going to do this the right way.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Hutch, I certainly, that's one thing that I would hope to see, is just like a radical engagement in these right wing and sort of alternative media spaces as well.
What about now?
We need. I think we're good now.
We're good.
But yeah, this guy's a comedian and he's going on Theo Von's podcast, and Theo Von's podcast is obviously massive, and I think he just does such a. I didn't agree with literally everything he said, but I think he did a really good job of making the case for left-wing politics.
All right, here we go.
I think you could really see stuff that we take for granted as progress. Gay marriage is another thing. There's a really weird cultural, I think this is what happens anytime the party that's backed by the powers that be, big business, the rich people, the richest people in the world want far right politicians. And I think if they
still,
absolutely, without question.
Yes.
I feel like tech is now. I just feel like the parties
Elon
have
Musk
changed.
is a huge Trump guy.
That's a good point.
I think rich people will support whoever's in power, number one, but they want to transfer wealth from the poor to the rich. They've been really good at doing it. The biggest issue, I think the reason the Democrats lost is because they pretend that there is no problem. I think inflation, a big part of inflation is that companies realize they can just charge you more and say it's somebody else's fault. A lot of it's price gouging. That's true. And
everything gets so much more expensive.
And companies are, some of it is just real inflation, but some of it is companies are hiding behind inflation. And like, Democrats did nothing to stop price gouging, right? They didn't even say they were going to do it. you can't tell people that things are going good when they're just clearly not. The most important issue for people is that things are fucking more, they have no health care. Wage inequality is out of control. We're not, people's wages have not kept pace with how much bosses are earning.
Well, yeah. Well, what percent? I mean, Bernie Sanders said greatly that he thought if AI starts to happen for companies, right? So companies are making more money.
We don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you don't get anything and we keep all the fucking profits. And I do think, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit last time where it's like AI as a tool to fucking do creative shit. It's so weird when it's like it should be making normal people's lives easier. It shouldn't just be for rich people to be able to charge less. Like there should be some protections for workers, and we should be able to, like, you know, you should be able to buy a house, all these regular issues that weren't really hit on. It was just, well, you got to vote for us because the other person's worse. And even though I think that is true, that's not a winning message. That's nothing, especially when the other side is offering, they're at least saying shit's bad.
Well, yeah.
And they're saying it's for the wrong reasons. I don't think.
So there's other clips too where he's, you know, they're cracking jokes, they're laughing. So he's putting out these left-wing. I didn't agree with everything he said right there, but like,
Sure.
I think that was a really good example of meeting people where they're at, not going scorched earth, and you know, planting the seeds of like left-wing curiosity right there. And I think that creators need to start being less shy about having these kinds of conversations, and then like not it like every conversation that we have with right wingers can't be like a knockdown, drag out, Rob Noor debate. Like there has to be some level of trying to meet people where they're at. And so that's what I want to see from creators especially in the coming couple of years. It's going to be really important, I think.
What about you, Pisco?
Yeah, I pretty much, sorry for the delay there. I am getting the thing that we were just talked about though in the chat. I very much want to see a transition to in-person content. I think that there needs to be more actual moments of interaction, actual guests that are in person,
Touching
actually
grass.
going on, touching grass. And I think that the best way to do that, I'll have some ideas about it, but and we'll kind of keep people posted on it, and more to come. But I think that it's encouraging left-wing creators to create some physical spaces or create some initiatives that encounter people in the real world in addition to all of their online stuff. So obviously don't give up the online stuff, but there's something tangible about how even the moments that are captured online of conservative people, they seem more authentic than a lot of like the Zoom discussion rooms that a lot of left-wing people have. So that's a priority of mine going forward.
So I'll say, for my part, again, I kind of had an impromptu discussion about this with Steven earlier today. And, much of my assessment kind of mirrors yours, the three of you. So number one, I do agree with the lock it in thing. So if you look at my media diet, I try to be as friendly with everybody as much as I can on the left of center. So there are some exceptions. I do not like Brianna Joy Gray. I don't even know if we call Jimmy Dore part of the left anymore. I do not know Hassan. I know very little about him, but like
We got some Fox News coverage today. Oh boy, it's turning into a thing.
I watched The Vanguard, for example. It's Zach and Gavin. They are two very left content creators. I think they're really smart. I disagree with them on certain like pragmatic policy decisions. We've had some good debates. I know that they brawled with Hutch. I don't know if you guys ever ended up having a debate, but they took shots at you. They actually apologized to me when I super chatted them like a couple of days later. They're like, "Hey, Josiah, by the way, like we didn't mean to go as hard as we did on your boy Hutch. Sorry about that. We just like to throw elbows and talk shit." And I'm like, "Well, Hutch does too. I'm sure you guys have a good conversation." Anyway,
Bridge is intact if they want it to be. I'm fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it also includes Destiny and Mehdi Hassan and others, because my notion is, if you recognize that the Republican Party is not the only, but the immediate political obstacle to progress in this country, which I believe is an invincible position. Brianna Joy Gray could never refute that. Nobody could. That is the most perfect political position a person can have. And if you buy into that, then I don't care if you're Kyle Kalinske, if you're Zach and Gavin, if you're Destiny, that is the most important quality for an ally in this space, as far as I'm concerned. Now, if you're anti-electoral or you're accelerationist or you're both sides or you employ false equivalences, then that's something very different. I don't have much use for you. So again, that's the difference between Kyle Kalinske and Mehdi Hassan and a Brianna Joy Gray or a Ryan Grimm, for example. So I do think we need to lock it in as much as possible. And I think that Kyle Kalinske has been very receptive to building a bridge with destiny and vice versa. And I hope that happens. Yeah, we need to lock it in. We need to lock it in and not succumb to what Freud calls the narcissism of small differences, right? And I understand that small differences are not necessarily very small at all. Like if you believe that there's a genocide going on in Gaza, it's really hard to set that aside unless you also know that the Republicans will almost certainly be worse on the single issue as well. And so that should make the calculus relatively easier for privileged political commentators who are not personally affected by that issue, like somebody who's actually in Gaza. So I think that we need to factor in that. Something that Emma Vigeland, for example, really
quick shout out Brian
Yeah.
Tyler Cohen in my chat, but I just got to say he is an example of what I think is what we need to be moving towards, which is someone who's a killer and someone who is trying to actually build bridges with people he might not agree with 100% of the time and have good content. But I just want to shout him out.
Yeah,
he's
again,
good.
so Brian is launching that chorus program with David Packman and Kenny from Too Raw, Too Real and others as well. So they're taking steps towards it. And Brian also wrote a book called Shameless, which you all should definitely read. It came out a couple of months ago, where he talks about the asymmetry in the media landscape and working to correct it. So I totally agree that we need to lock it in and not let policy disagreements totally divide us. I also don't think that we have to necessarily be best friends. So like one of the things, again, that going back to the progressive victory thing, one of the things I liked about it, at least initially, is like, okay, Destiny and Vosh and Emma Vigeland aren't pretending to be best friends, and that's okay. We don't have to be. It's great if you have that buddy-buddy dynamic, but otherwise, I think there's also something saying like, hey, I personally don't like this person, but I'm absolutely going to work with them because they are political allies in this context. I think you also have to have that attitude as well if you're not prepared to be friends with your collaborators. I totally agree with Hutch that you also need to be willing to engage with in these right-wing or right-wing adjacent spaces and not always make it a knockdown, drag-out fight. Kyle
Like Mark
Kalinske-
Cuban. Mark Cuban, I think, did a really good job of doing that.
Yes, he did. I mean, he's a really good advocate in that respect. And again, Kyle Kalinske, use him as an example. He had been invited on Piers Morgan's show multiple times and did not want to do it.
And he can perform well on Piers
Right.
Morgan. That's the thing. Like people like Brian Tyler Cohen and Piers, by and large, I think the last time they were saddled sometimes with some baggage and some incompetent, I have to say, frankly, and bias moderating. But these people show up to platforms where conservatives are, and they don't embarrass themselves. They don't fall over themselves apologizing and being like not based as fuck. Whereas if you have real people who go to these spaces and don't pretend to like always be beholden to whatever mainstream conservative talking points like they want to give out, I think that that's helpful for our message as well. And frankly, one of the big criticisms was Kamala's unwillingness to go to places where she was going to get pushback, even though she went to Fox News. The not going to the
Joe Rogan
thing, I think even
Yeah.
in real time, you guys called that out.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And listen, he's the armchair quarterback, but I do think that was a missed opportunity. And I think we need to start laying the seeds for that now. Have people like Pete Buttigieg and Tim Walz and Gretchen Whitmer and others. I mean, not just go on the Breakfast Club, which is really good, but also Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and others, and then work to create, to the best that we can, spaces like that as well. Brian has pointed out, and I'm a fraction of the size of Brian's channel, but I will tell you from my experience interviewing senators and Congress people, it is really difficult. It is very, very difficult. There seems to be a receptiveness by right-wing politicians to engage with right-wing media, and Democrats are lagging behind on this. So to the extent that potentially any Democratic politicians or their staff are watching, you and your candidates have to be willing to talk to people in the alternative media space. And I'm not saying that, I've got 430,000 subscribers, 20 million views a month. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe it needs to be David Packman, Brian Tyler Cohen, Luke Beasley, even, who's about to hit 1 million subscribers. That's fine. Whatever the standard is, but for God's sakes, this is the future of media. So, and it's also a feedback loop, right? So Trump helped grow, MAGA helped grow the right-wing media ecosystem. Democrats have to do the same thing. by being willing to lend their time and attention to it. So I think all of these things need to happen, and we've got 4 years to try, but I think we need to hit the
But
ground.
it starts
running.
tomorrow, the midterms,
Yes.
and I want to stress this. Like, one of the reasons why I have a fire under my ass is it's tomorrow, right? People are starting to think about the midterms a year from now. Like, they're already going to be making decisions, and if we're not putting in the work right now,
Yeah.
Can you read
Yeah,
it?
so Brian just said this, but it's not about just going on other shows. It was about using this time during the campaign to build up left-wing media that will never do the work the rest of the year. And the Harris campaign never did that. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And I should say just real quick, I know we were going to close at 9. If Brian wants to jump in, I'm willing to hang on for another 30 minutes or so and chat with him. I don't know if Hutch and Econoboy are as well. But Brian, if you're watching, I can send a link to Pisco and he can send it to you, or I can DM it to you on Twitter. Up to you. But I'm sorry, continue, Pisco.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that, like, people just blink and the midterms will already be in sight. One of the things that I shared that Dark Gothic MAGA video that Joanna made. I think it's really chilling, and people are very scared about what these crypto fascists, really, like crypto investors and tech bros, what they actually want. But one of the things that gives me some optimism, and for me, like, the thing that brings me hope, is there's not a ton of time. There's not a ton of time before democracy is back on the market, and like we have another opportunity to make some headway. Even now, and one thing that Brian tweeted out is there's going to be an election, I think, for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Is that true, Josiah? Coming up pretty soon. But that's a deeply important election where there's already been a great deal of controversy about recent decisions by the Wisconsin Supreme Court affecting abortion, affecting the districting in Wisconsin, which has been fucked for years. There was one time, and I'll put in the studio request for you in the chat there, Brian, but there was one year where I think Wisconsin went 48-49 Republicans, and in their state houses, it was split like 60-40 Republicans. It's not even Democratic. But yeah, that's why it's key to have these Supreme Court seats, and that's coming up like tomorrow. It's coming up soon.
Yeah, so there's a vacancy, or there's a Supreme Court election in, I think it's April of next year, and that we only have a 1-seat majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court as a consequence, by the way, I think in part of Destiny's canvassing, which I participated in. I know several others did as well during the last election, which got Janet Protasiewicz elected to the high court. The only reason we have fairer maps in Wisconsin is because of that liberal majority, and we might lose it given the anti-incumbency surge, which is sweeping the globe. So yeah, I plan to be spending time in Wisconsin. I hope Destiny and others do as well. And Brian, check your Twitter DMs because I sent you the link as well. If you want to pop
I shouldn't
in.
have posted it in my chat then, right?
You can. I mean, we'll know if it's Brian or not. He's recognizable.
Oh, yeah, put the video
yeah.
up. Yeah.
So if Rob jumps in, we'll be like, Rob, sorry, not right now. I'm sorry. Econoboy, go ahead, buddy.
I was going to say, there's a lot of early election tests that are kind of coming down the pipe in 25, like the Virginia gubernatorial race and legislative races will be pretty important, like signals as to how people are reacting to Trump's kind of first few months in office. Elise Stefaniak, I always forget how to pronounce her last name. She'll probably get confirmed to her position, my guess would be, and her district is sort of an R plus 10 or 11. That'll be a special election in 2025, and that'll be an interesting, like, in theory, that's flippable. Democrats held that district before. So if like we flip that district, it's like, okay, that's a signal that people are not really cool with what Trump's been doing his first few months in office. But those are all going to be, the New Jersey elections as well. Those are all going to be interesting tests in 2025 as well, to kind of just see what the temperature of to basically see if Hutch's theory is right, is that are people actually responding positively to the strongman-like behavior, or are the consequences of Trump's administration so bad that people are sort of very negatively reacting to it?
It's not my theory, to be clear. I'm just saying it could happen.
Is his potential scenario?
God, I hope not.
There you go. Yeah,
All right, so we got Brian Tyler Cohen of Brian Tyler Cohen. What's up, man? How are you?
Hey, thank you guys for letting me be a part of this. I appreciate it, and thanks for like the welcome into this space. This is obviously all very new territory, for me. But I appreciate the welcome here.
Well, I appreciate you like diving into, like, I know you just started up your Twitch account. I'm sure it's growing like bonkers. It's good because when I think you've been going live much more frequently as the election was ramping up, and you were seeing some pretty high numbers. How did it feel, going from pre-recorded content to, very frequent live engagement?
Yeah,
What was that like?
that was tough because that's not a muscle that I had trained at all over the last few years. I mean, I'm very focused on very highly produced, like short, fast content, and so going live and sitting there for hours. I mean, on election night, I was live for I don't know, maybe 10 hours that day, and just it is a muscle, literally and figuratively, that I had never trained before. And the art of vamping is just don't underestimate how difficult it is.
There's no doubt. Hutch has been doing it for, my God, 10 years, buddy?
Well, I was going to say, it is a very different beast, because when I first started out, it was just YouTube VODs, and then I got a job at Machinima doing produced stuff. And when I started doing live streaming, it took me like 2 years before I got comfortable for real.
Yeah.
It's just very, very different.
Yeah. But I think a lot of the points that you guys have made here tonight and just are working on more broadly. I mean, it's great to see. I think something that I'm recognizing throughout the entire ecosystem is that, and I had spoken to Destiny about this yesterday as well. This idea that and I know, Josiah, you had alluded to this being in my book, and I appreciate that. But this idea that like the right gets its bona fides by being vehemently pro-Republican. And the left-wing creators get their bona fides, it feels like, by being vehemently anti-Democrat. And so there's this massive asymmetry at play. There's this massive asymmetry at play where everybody hates on the left, and that's how they build up their brands, and that's how they get their cred, basically. And so it's no wonder that even in an ecosystem, we're at a disadvantage, because the right has so many more players than the left. They dominate us on every platform. I think TikTok is the only social media platform where the left still has a minor advantage. And I mean, already unto itself, the fact that it's not 75-25 in Democrats' favor on TikTok, which is like primarily for young people, is already insane. But then for the people that actually do have platforms, to use that to squander our opportunity to actually get people on board, because Democrats, because Democrats aren't succeeding at whatever purity tests have been imposed, is just not how politics works. It's like wasting all of this time that we have in pursuit of like perfection, and yet far from gaining perfection, we're just losing races, and we're going the opposite direction. And so like we have to get over this idea that our politicians are our spiritual leaders, or are our spouses or partners, or need to be perfect in some way. They're not. They are vehicles to get us closer to where we want to go, and nothing more. And sometimes we're only going to agree with them 90% of the time, or 80 or 70% of the time, or hell, 50% of the time. But it's better than what we've got now. Like, we have to recognize that this is like a two-party system here, and we can go toward one, even if they're not perfect, if it means that we don't have to get sucked into this like hellscape that is dealing with the other.
But Brian, can I ask you something to that point? Because first of all, I think everything you just said is totally fucking based. But there is some commentary from people like Cenk Uygur and others, which is like, and on some level, I agree with some of it, which is sometimes you have these Democratic politicians that just do these bizarre things. It's kind of unfair because I'm going to point out Manchin, right? And he's a kind of esoteric candidate in a state that, so it's not representative, but it's the kind of feeling I get where just today or yesterday or something, he's like, well, I'm going to change. And now I'm going to be very pushing for the Democratic judges because I've come to see how much of a threat Trump is, and I'm very like scared of what he's going to do. Now I understand that's not representative of most Democrats, but it's just a kind of feeling where we don't have these killers. We don't have these people who are, or they just do these bizarre things. Is there anything among the Democratic candidates themselves beyond the media structure that you think needs serious change?
Yeah, dude. Stop pretending like if you give goodwill to Republicans that you're going to get it back. I don't know how many times we have to sit there and watch Democrats say like, oh, well, we have to get back to regular order. We have to respect our norms and institutions in this hope that goodwill will lead to some elusive reciprocity by Republicans. It never does. Take Merrick Garland, for example. He refused to investigate Donald Trump because, God forbid, we have the optics of politicization at the DOJ. And I guess he did that because he, again, like wanted to confer this idea of not seeming too partisan. Well, what did the Republicans do? They claimed the DOJ was weaponized anyway. They literally started a subcommittee on the weaponization of government. And so, like, we gained no goodwill by virtue of refusing to investigate Donald Trump for the first 2 years before Jack Smith was ultimately appointed the special prosecutor. But we gained no goodwill. And in fact, far from gaining any goodwill, far from being able to, like, gain some benefit from Republicans, they did the exact same thing, if not worse, than if Merrick Garland had just barreled ahead with this investigation into Trump anyway. So this idea that we have to, like, give goodwill to Republicans and then get it back is so backwards and so blind to the reality on the ground right now that I mean, to your exact point, we do need Democrats who are going to recognize the fight that we're in, meet this moment with the urgency that it deserves, and actually fight back instead of trying to usher in some bygone era of bipartisanship when Republicans are beating us over the head with this idea that it's never going to happen.
Yeah,
That's one
so
of my
to
favorite-
really to follow up on this is so important, and I love to see conversion in real time, and I'm seeing on Pisco's face he's recognizing the wisdom of what you're saying when it comes to Merrick Garland.
Wait.
By the way,
just-
Brian, just for the record,
Listen.
Brian, for the record, we have been howling about this.
I want to
for
say,
some time.
I want to say to Brian's point, I think Brian is correct globally. The only thing I would change is on that specific point. That's one where I differ from with the group on, because I don't actually blame Merrick Garland for a lot of the delay there. But I agree with the broader global point. I agree that it's an outdated kind of view of politics that unfortunately is dead as much as we want to bring it back. The only disagreement I have is on the specific example, but everything else that Brian said is completely based. I just want to say that.
So again,
Totally
so
fair.
to his point though, again, we talked about this. Look at the polling. Merrick Garland's efforts have been for naught. The polling when it comes to the DOJ and their credibility with the Republicans is as bad as it was prior to Merrick Garland's confirmation, and is probably even worse. So he has bought no goodwill. He has bought such little goodwill that his successor is Matt Gaetz.
I totally agree. The thing is, if the whole exercise was, I think Merrick Garland should be doing things so that the public support the DOJ, that is just not my view of what we're talking about. I just have a different view on.
I understand. I'm just
what
taking the
justice
opportunity.
requires.
I was just taking the opportunity to
Yeah, I
underscore Brian's point and to shit on Merrick Garland, because
it's a good point globally that I agree.
Yeah, no,
with.
100%. I will also say, Brian, there's another example that I'm curious if you follow what's going on with the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I've not heard you say this. I think I heard you criticize Dick Durbin yesterday. I'm a big Sheldon Whitehouse fan, and I expect you are as well. And in a better timeline, he is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and things look a lot different. One of the things that the Trump administration did the first time around is they revoked this rule called the blue slip, which was basically Democrats, for the audience who are not aware of it, any senator could effectively veto a presidential nominee for federal court in their state. It was called a blue slip. It was basically like, hey, Mr. President, this one doesn't work for me. Can you pick somebody else? When Republicans took the Senate in 2017 and Trump became president, they revoked the blue slip rule just unilaterally, proactively for district court judges.
Right.
Circuit court judges, not district courts. And when Democrats took power back in 2020 and 2021, Republicans were so upset. Oh, you need to restore the blue slip rule. We need to have say in what President Biden nominates. And Sheldon Whitehouse said, no, you all created this mess. We're not going to rebalance the scales. This is the mess that you've created. But I've criticized Dick Durbin because I think he should have done one further. I think just as the Senate Republicans revoked the blue slip rule for circuit judges, Democrats should have done it for district judges. 100%. And we're actually living with the consequences of this right now, because Aileen Cannon is a district court judge. Yep. And the reason that she got that Trump's documents case and was able to overturn it or to dismiss it was because there were a number of vacancies in Florida that were blocked by Republicans out of Florida. So my point is, we have lost the opportunity to, maximize the number of judges that President Biden can appoint. And if I had to bet, I would bet $100 that Senate Republicans, now that Trump is going back into the White House, the moment it's convenient, they'll revoke the blue slip rule again for district judges and just populate the United States with a bunch of little Aileen Cannons that we're going to have to live with for the rest of our lives. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because Dick Durbin didn't want to do that, because he was like, well, we've got to return to normal order.
Right.
And so I guess my question for you is, do you expect, based on conversations you've had with Senate Democrats, do you expect that they are learning the lesson, or are you worried that they're going to double down on this hope that Republicans will reciprocate their good faith?
Well, this isn't based on conversations because I haven't spoken to any Senate Democrats in a long time, but just from what I know, I mean, look, I think we would be fools to assume that that the Democrats that we have, who have proven over and over and over again that they are more deferential to regular order and norms than they are to fighting, will somehow just become people that they aren't. And so I think it's incumbent on us, to beat this drum. It's incumbent on us to elect people who are going to actually put winning over like this adherence to norms, as if they're being sent to Washington to protect norms and not to protect like reproductive rights and civil rights and voting rights and all of that stuff. So look, I mean, as cynical as a take as it may be, no, I would probably defer to just saying that the people who have been deferential to norms are going to remain deferential to norms, as elusive as it might be, as opposed to recognizing that we actually have to change our tune and start fighting. I think until we get different people in there, I mean, right now it doesn't even matter because we'll be relegated to the minority anyway. But until we have different people in there, or until we beat it over the head like over and over and over and over, and these Republicans, by the way, stop taking their cues from the both sides media, then I think really nothing is going to change.
I
also
know
think
go ahead, Hutch. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I also think it's challenging because when you look at polling, it's something like 75% of Americans polled want the parties to work together, but they don't seem to punish Republicans for their
Correct.
obstruction. And so it's just, it is a really difficult thing to navigate because, they seem to give Democrats a lot more shit when they engage in kind of like hardball.
And
I don't
not
really know what
reward
the answer
them.
to that is.
And that's the way that the system is, just that Republicans are graded on a curve, right? Like when we say that we want the parties to work together, think about which parties are working together. Think about which party passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. Think about which party and brags about calling it the bipartisan infrastructure law. Think about which party brags about calling it the bipartisan gun safety reform law.
Right.
Like, it is only one party that's doing this. And the expectation, because the Democrats are the adults in the room, the only party that's expected to work in a bipartisan fashion and does work in a bipartisan fashion and makes compromises in a bipartisan fashion, in the same way that we did for the border bill that gave everything the Republicans wanted without any comprehensive immigration reform, and still it was fucking knocked down by Trump and Republicans, is just the Democrats. And meanwhile, what did Republicans do with their political capital? How much bipartisanship did they engage in? There was a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. That's it. That's what they did. That's what they used their political capital on. They had a willing Democratic Party that was clearly looking to work on infrastructure because they did it the next term. They had a Democratic Party that was looking to work on on issue after issue. The Democrats have proven that they're willing to make compromises and concessions for Republicans,
And still are.
and still are to this day. I mean, Kamala Harris ran a campaign where presumably she's looking for majorities in every house in Congress, but still was willing to sign that border bill. And so, like, that's the asymmetry on full display.
I'll give you a concrete example that I use all the time in conversations and debates I have with MAGA Republicans on this notion of bipartisanship. So consider this: in 2020, we already tried to impeach Donald Trump. Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. But when there was a national crisis in the form of COVID, what did she do? She worked bipartisanly with Trump and Republicans on two major COVID stimulus bills. So this is a man who wasn't just the advert or like the opposition. I imagine a lot of Democratic politicians understandably hate Donald Trump personally. They think he's a threat to democracy. They think he's a fascist. There is a personal animus there, which is rightly and richly deserved. But in an election year, with that man whom they tried to impeach, they worked with him bipartisanly to save American lives and to stimulate the economy, knowing that the motherfucker would get the credit in an election year. So not that Democrats are perfect, but this idea that, well, neither side wants to work together. To your point, not only do we have all of President Biden's bipartisan accomplishments, for which he was not rewarded at all, we actually have concrete proof of Democrats reaching across the aisle with Trump when he was president. There's no question that one party is objectively superior to the other when it comes to concrete.
I mean, Fetterman is saying he's going to vote for Oz as long as Oz promises to maintain funding.
Dude, Jared Polis on Twitter is having one of the most insane meltdowns I've ever seen in my life, because he's one of these weird Democrats that apparently, like, is okay with RFK. I don't know what's going on with certain Democrats. I mean, the interesting thing about the bipartisan stuff is like you will hear some people that are like, oh, like the reason why Democrats lost the election is because of the woke, policies and the radical left wing. And it's like, guys, I don't think a campaign could be more optimally structured to try its hardest to dissuade people from that notion. This campaign utterly failed to dissuade the people that think that of that notion, despite doing literally every conceivable thing you could do to dissuade people from thinking, oh, we're too woke, we're too far left. Kamala barely even mentioned she would be the first female president. I don't think she ever mentioned it. She leaned so far away from identity politics and campaigned with Republicans and tried to play the moderate and all this stuff. And it utterly failed. The percentage of the last exit poll that I saw, the percentage of Trump voters in 2020 that voted for Kamala was lower than the percentage of Trump voters that voted for Biden, which
Yeah.
was lower than the percentage of Romney voters that voted for Hillary. This is just like not a strategy that has any evidence. If you want to say, hey, maybe the most left-wing person possible wouldn't be an optimal candidate, fine. But clearly, the very centrist, moderate, calm down rhetoric that we've tried over the last 4 to 5 years, it just hasn't been overly successful. Like even 2020, we won that election by the thinnest possible margin you could imagine. And that was in a year with record turnout. Like, I just don't think that that's a strategy that has much evidence backing it.
I
So-
would also caution a little bit against making like trying to diagnose the problem in an election cycle where I do believe that the number one issue was the impacts of inflation on the economy and how every governing party in the world lost seats or lost their races themselves. And this was the first time that that's happened in every industrialized country since 1905. That there was not a single incumbent governing party that gained ground in this election cycle. And so I don't want to miss out. I don't want to use this moment to try to diagnose too much, because I do think that if we were in a different economic environment where inflation wasn't bearing down on so many people and they just say like, look, things are more expensive now than they used to be. Who's in charge? Democrats are in charge. I'm going to punish those people. Like that, there is a lot of potency to that. And so I don't disagree with you at all that I do think that there are issues with tacking right, for example, although I can make the counter argument and say people like Jared Golden, who are more conservative, ran a much more conservative race than Kamala Harris. He outperformed her by double digit points, right? So there's always the counter argument that can make, but I do think that it's impossible right now to really have that argument in good faith, knowing that really I think the principal argument here was that even with the best candidate in the world, more conservative, more progressive, or dead on in the center, that I don't know that person would have won in this kind of economic environment.
Yeah,
No,
and
that's
I
right.
should say, as far as incumbents went, Vice President Harris performed relatively well compared to other incumbent,
Right.
candidates when you examine the global anti-incumbency surge. Conboy, you had something to follow up with that though?
No, I was just going to say, like, Brian's right in the sense that you've got, like, people who are saying, like, what's her name? Like, Marie Perez up in Oregon, or maybe...
Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. Yeah.
Yeah, like, people are saying, like, oh, this is an example of running to the right working, and people are saying, well, AOC outperformed Kamala. That's an example of running to the left
Right.
working. And so I get, you can play a narrative on either side. But
Totally.
I think at the very least, the extreme statements that people make can be certainly proven wrong by, at the very least, this election, Democratic results as of late, where like people will say like, oh, like it's just necessarily the case that progressive rhetoric is why we're losing this election. It's necessarily the case that the Democrats are too far left on these issues and we need to like significantly moderate. Like I've seen some people on Twitter go so far as to say like, yeah, we just should never talk about trans issues or make that a point in a campaign. And it's like, this is a civil rights issue, right? I mean, we shouldn't just completely abandon certain principles because the Republicans want to bully trans people. Like this, there's just a level here where, look, I think on one hand, it's not clearly electorally disadvantageous to run on certain progressive issues. And yeah, we might be able to moderate somewhat, but I don't know. I do think that people, you're right, that I think that people are taking too strong of a view on particular issues that might have led to this result, when the reality is we are so polarized in this environment that, hey, especially given what we were talking about beforehand, how bad it might be in 26 and 28, like how polarized we'll be then. that truthfully, probably any Democrat that gets past the nomination is probably going to stand a pretty good shot. But there is a question on what the optimal message would be. At the end of the day, though, it's like we have to come together. We have to hopefully, we can't be sort of overly exclusionary with our movement in the next 4 years, where we see people on Twitter and these other social media accounts saying, oh, we have to exclude all these far left crazy people in the party. And it's like, I don't know. This just doesn't seem like the type of environment where that's reasonable.
Well, so Brian can speak to this. I'm curious what he has to say on this particular point. But this idea that we can't, we shouldn't, on principle, because it's a civil rights issue, walk away or stay silent on trans issues. But Vice President Harris effectively was, and it still didn't matter. So to your point,
and it didn't even work.
It didn't work. And this is something that I know Brian was kind of fighting for his life with Piers Morgan on. I could just see like the vein in your temple about to erupt because this, I pick on Piers a lot. I have a huge beef with him because this is a guy who presents himself as a nonpartisan journalist, but he's obviously a Trump supporter, and that's fine. Just be honest about it. But he'll look Brian and Luke and everybody else in the face and say, no, I'm independent, I'm nonpartisan. But he won't let this go either. And so, Brian, can you talk about that? Because I'm convinced that there is no foolproof strategy in the sense that if you disavow it, you're a flip-flopper. If you're silent on it, you're cowardly. This idea that, if you change positions or you're silent on issues, because the right wing will simply weaponize your silence or your change of heart in bad faith. And people like even Piers Morgan, who has one of the fastest growing YouTube channels out there, will continue to signal boost that. So do you see a way to navigate that minefield, or is it just something that we're going to have to walk into and hope it doesn't kill us? Speaking.
It's the right question. And I got to jump off in about 2 minutes, but it's the right question. And really the issue here that I think that we're going to have a tough time contending with is that really we're in a post-truth environment where it doesn't matter what the Democrats' positions are so much. The Republicans will run with them anyway. To your point, like Kamala Harris never uttered a word about not only trans issues, but like gender reassignment surgeries in prison. And yet this was still the issue that Republicans put nearly $250 million behind. So it almost doesn't matter what she says one way or the other. I mean, her campaign had actually disavowed that position unto itself. Did that stop the Republicans from peppering people on a daily basis as if this was her position? No. So really what this comes down to is making sure that we have an ecosystem that is big enough to contend with what the right is doing. And if we want to have any chance at pushing back against lies, then it needs to be big enough that we're able to do that. And B, an ecosystem that's big enough that we're not just always on the defense and Republicans come up with stuff that they want to say. And then we're using all of our time fighting on their turf, by the way, on their terrain, and just pushing back against these lies that they put forward. If we're able to actually make an affirmative case or go on the offense and put them on the defense, that will be such a better position than just having us swat back from our small perches on just the absolute deluge of disinformation that we're contending with. So this really is a problem that has to do with our megaphone above anything else. And we have to, again, I'm glad that we're all having the opportunity to talk right now and and grow the ecosystem this way. But it really is a matter of getting our voices out there and growing our ecosystem so that we are not just a tiny voice trying to swat back just like an avalanche of disinformation from the right.
Well, before you
That's why
jump
I retweet
off,
everything you say, Brian. Every fucking thing.
Before you jump off on that score, that's a good segue. Are you in a position to pitch Chorus or to talk about Chorus a bit before you hop off? Because
Chorus is just one small step that we're taking to basically raise money for and elevate the voices of a bunch of left-wing creators. And the raising money means that there is dedicated staff that can do editing, that can do research, that can do booking for people. There's also people who can teach folks who are maybe just on YouTube how to go over to TikTok, who are on TikTok how to go over to Instagram, and build multi-platform approaches to all of this. My job, what I want to do as a part of this, is be involved in coordinating messaging among the left. And I think that's important because for years it has felt like Republicans go to a morning meeting every day and they're so aligned on messaging. And yet the Democrats wake up, and we've got people yelling about abortion and healthcare and gun safety and like climate change, and we have no focused, organized messaging. And I feel like if we're able to organize our messaging in a more structured manner, then we can be more effective at driving the conversation of the day. And so that's going to be my role in all of this. But I think, like, the money aspect is going to help smaller creators build up their channels and also be able to afford, to do content creation full time in the way that Republicans have fostered that ecosystem. So yeah, that's a little bit about what Chorus is.
And of course, it's going to be a worker co-op, right? And we're going to have
Yes.
profit.
It's true though, like in the sense that a lot of these people are going to, I mean, everyone's going to maintain their own specific channels, and that's the point. Like, the point isn't to just basically combine everybody into one narrow channel that might just reach a certain demographic. We want people to have their own channels. This way they can continue reaching their own specific demographics. And some people might have younger audiences. That's great. We don't want to exclude people by virtue of just streamlining everything and just reaching one specific demographic. So it's good that people have separate channels that exist in the ecosystems.
Brian, of course, we have to ask after the whole tenant media thing. Russia will not be involved in this enterprise.
No. Unfortunately, no $100,000 checks per video. But I think we'll, I think we'll have to survive without that. So
I'm not ruling that out personally. He doesn't speak for me.
I'm putting his link in my chat and in Hutch's chat, so please give Brian a follow.
Yeah, and this will be on the VOD.
Well, thank you guys again. I appreciate it, and definitely want to do this more if you guys are down.
Hell yeah, absolutely, man. And appreciate all that you do. Check out We Are Chorus. Check out Tyler Cohen's channel. And Shameless, which again, was that 2 months ago? When did that drop?
Yeah, I think it was in August, which feels like a lifetime ago. So.
Forward written by none other than Jamie motherfucking Raskin. I mean, that's something, bro. So
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye.
I was gonna say right before we leave, I think I checked. We all have Blue Sky accounts. So guys, be sure to follow us on Blue Sky. I don't know. I'm just a Conoboy on Blue Sky. I think we're all roughly just what we are on Twitter. So
I believe it's pronounced Blueski.
Oh my gosh, is it really?
No.
Am I out of the loop on this one? Oh, okay.
Yeah. No.
It's like all the kids
And
these
there-
days.
Follow us on Blue Sky, and there's one last thing, and before we leave, I finally made our YouTube account that we're gonna put up all the old Live and Learn episodes on, and we'll do something with it. I literally just made it as we were talking, and so
do you want to send me the link?
Yeah,
so
I'll
they
send
can.
you,
Yeah,
I'll send you the link here on.
and I'll put it in chat real quick.
It's,
Just so people know, for me on Blue Sky, I'm Hutchy the Hutch.
Hutchy the Hutch.
Because Hutch was taken, bro.
What?
Couldn't get Hutchinson.
Do what?
Couldn't get it.
Pisco, what the fuck?
I don't know what happened.
Tries to post a
I guess
link
I
and
can
his
make
camera
my.
stopped
I guess I
working.
can make my own domain. Is that what I need to do?
Pisco has the most bizarre IT issues.
I don't know what happened. What the hell happened?
No, you're back. You're good. You're good.
Okay.
Oh, dude, if he tries to play solitaire, he'll blow up his fucking apartment. So there we go. Live and Learn YouTube, because we're gonna have like a central hub for it. Are we doing like a Twitter account thing too?
Yeah, I'm
a
on that.
Blueski?
Yeah,
great
I'm on
question.
that.
In a Blueski. And then the real question is, will you all be able to tell who is using the Live? That's going to be, okay, folks, that's going to be your mission, because obviously we'll all have access to the Twitter.
Yeah.
Will you be able to tell who is posting on the Live and Learn account at any given time? Is it going to be Hutch? Is it going to be Econoboy? Is it going to be Pisco? Is it going to be me? I'll tell you what, if Live and Learn is ever in Dave Portnoy's replies, you know who the fuck that is. Yeah.
That's
Awesome.
great.
All right. Well, fellas, any other final words, final shout outs? I know we kept you guys 40 minutes longer than usual. Anything from you, Hutch, Conoboy, Pisco? Any updates, announcements?
I just want to say I'm loving doing the show with you guys. It's been great. It's been a bright spot of my Wednesday evening ever since we started. Especially now that Trump's going to be president again, this will be a nice little pick me up. Especially as we get closer and closer to the full realization of Trump's second term.
You guys got me to successfully commit to the longest podcast that I've ever been a part of, and I've been a part of like 7 podcasts. So this is the longest running one so far.
Hey man, wait, what's the competition exactly? Are they like Kevin McCarthy tier, like 10 years where they last a month? What?
It was always like we would get to like 12 episodes and then it would stop. So yeah.
fair. Well, I have a lot of fun yelling at Pisco. So it's a real incentive for me, and slowly converting Hutch into being a Supreme Court fanatic. I'm waiting for it. He's
Okay, we're not talking about the courts. Let's go.
Yeah,
I got to
yeah.
feed my pet.
All right, bye guys. Appreciate it. Thanks
Bye-bye.
everybody. I'm not sure that Pisco meant to shut his camera off.
Yeah, I know. I did not. But bye, guys.
Bye, guys.